Buena gente. ¿Se me escucha o no se me escucha? A ver, gente. Decidme a ver qué tal se escucha. Si se escucha bien, si se escucha mal, si le subo algo, el volumen. A ver, vamos a empezar. Vamos a empezar explorando un poco el barco, ¿vale? Vamos a empezar explorando un poquito el barco. Y aunque sea en el modo día. Y después no, cuando quede poco, nos vamos y vemos a ver qué hace esta gente y ya nos metemos con la simulación, ¿vale? Así que nada, gente. Qué alegría veros por aquí, a los madrugadores. Si sois de España, claro, que aquí son las 4 de la mañana. El simulador cuando lo vemos dentro de 40 minutos, creo que es. En 40 minutos choca. Estaremos 15 minutillos antes con esta gente a ver qué se cuenta. Y os intento traducir. Vale, gente. Allí son las 9 de la noche, madre mía. Aquí son las 4 de la mañana. Vale, le ha costado iniciar, pero lo hemos conseguido. A ver, gente, se me había olvidado, culpa mía, se me había olvidado que esta demo no tenía modo noche, pero bueno, vamos a, vamos a quedarnos con el modo día y ya está. Al final explorar el barco. Al final explorar el barco y luego ver todo este interior inundándose, porque según dicen en la simulación esta nueva, hay como 30 escenas de interior inundándose, así que veremos, le tengo muchas ganas, le tengo muchas, muchas ganas. A ver qué tal. Mirad todas estas cabinas, gente, que ya las exploramos hace unos meses, pero, pero bueno, hay que recordar que esto se inunda hoy, hace 111 años. Todo esto se va al fondo del Atlántico. Gente, gracias por donar, por las donaciones por ahí en TikTok. Muchas gracias. Mirad qué preciosidades de habitaciones. ¿Cómo se llama el juego? Titanic Honor and Glory se llama. Siempre que recorro esta demo, digo, parece mentira que todo esto se fuera al fondo del Atlántico, ¿eh? Vosotros imaginaos esto de noche con las luces parpadeando y el agua entrando. Uf, piel de gallina, ¿eh? A esta hora chocó, no, todavía quedan 40 minutillos. Después veremos una simulación. que pone la gente que ha hecho este juego. Cada aniversario. Mirad qué nivel de detalle. Si es que hasta parece que se puede tocar. ¿Verdad? ¿Qué opinas de la serie de Blood and Steel de Titanic? A ver, empecé a verla hace muchos años. Lo que pasa es que no me acuerdo ni dónde estaba y creo que la quitaron. Ya no la encuentro. Entonces, si alguien sabe de esa serie, pues si me lo puede decir dónde está, dónde se encuentra para verla. Gracias por dedicarle tanta pasión al Titanic y compartirla con nosotros. Sí, bueno, así empecé con TikTok, esa era la idea. Enseñar. Yo no iba con la idea de ser famoso, ni de ganar dinero, ni nada. Yo digo, vamos a enseñarle a la gente lo que me gusta, ¿no? Y mira, qué maravilla de comunidad. Es una maravilla. Vamos a la piscina, gente. Para el hundimiento falta choca a las I 40, ¿vale, gente? Son I 6 para a las I 40. No os preocupéis que tengo por aquí el directo de esta gente para ver cuándo ponen la animación. Así que no os preocupéis por eso. Decidme si se escucha las voces en inglés de estos señores y lo pongo un poco más bajo. Que es para enterarme un poco qué van diciendo y tal. Luego traduciré lo que pueda. Tampoco os esperéis que tenga yo aquí un nivel de inglés increíble, porque no es el caso, pero bueno, algo podré hacer. Gente, baños turcos. Esta zona en el Pecio se encuentra muy bien. Se encuentra muy bien conservada. Sobre todo esta zona típica de los baños turcos, esta de aquí. Que no sé si habéis visto una foto que salen aquí. Estas vidrieras, la puerta. Y se ve increíble. Vamos para arriba, gente. Gracias por las donaciones de TikTok, gente. Muchas gracias, de verdad. Vamos a ver un poco de... Vamos a ver un poco de tercera clase, ¿no, gente? Pasillos bastante simples. Es bastante laberinto por aquí. Ya que ahora se hunde a la I 40, gente, se hunde. A la I 40 ponemos... Bueno, un poquito antes ponemos la simulación. gente pista de squash. Aquí estuvieron jugando un partido justo a esta hora, o hace 20 minutos, hace 111 años, estuvieron aquí jugando dos jugadores profesionales de squash y quedaron para jugar al día siguiente, pero ya sabemos lo que pasó. Pero estaban jugando una hora antes del choque con el iceberg. Que lo comenté en un vídeo que tengo bastante antiguo. Y esas voces que se escuchan las voces, gente, de la gente esta inglesa. Le bajo el volumen, si queréis. Le baja un poquito, a ver si ahora. Y aquí es la pregunta que siempre me hago cuando vengo a esta zona de las cartas. ¿Cuántas historias se perderían aquí en el hundimiento, eh? Una pregunta, ¿cómo te llamas? Me llamo David. Gente, seguidme en Instagram, que por ahí estoy publicando últimamente cosas saliendo yo, y así sabréis cómo soy. Para la gente que no me siga. Me llamo igual en todos lados, DGL Titanic. Busquéis donde me busquéis, ahí estoy, con ese nombre. ¿Has escuchado la historia de Manuel, el mexicano a bordo del Titanic? Sí, le tengo que hacer un vídeo al hombre. Y tengo que hacer también el vídeo de los españoles del Titanic. Que mira que soy español y todavía no he hecho el vídeo. Tengo que hacerlo. Tengo que hacer muchas cosas. Tengo que también hablar de... Quiero hablar de la calefacción en el barco. Quiero hablar de algunos menús. Quiero hablar también de dónde iba todos los desechos. Dónde iba lo de los baños. Gente, mirad qué pasillo más extraño, ¿eh? Es como demasiado simple. Es como me da un poco de mal rollo. ¿Verdad? Vamos a salir de aquí. ¿Cuál película consideras que es más acertada históricamente? La de la última noche del Titanic, que está en blanco y negro, esa me parece muy buena. De hecho, Cameron se inspiró mucho en ella. Tú cuando la ves te das cuenta y dices, si es que la de 1997 tiene muchas cosas calcas, tiene muchas cosas que se le parece. Para eso ve algún vídeo como recordatorio a las 11:40. La verdad es que no tengo ninguno preparado, lo tenía que haber preparado esta tarde, pero no tengo nada. Pero bueno, mañana hacemos un vídeo de estos que me gustan a mí de recopilatorio de cosillas. ¿En qué parte estás? Estoy en Granada, en España, en Granada. Vamos a subir al puente, gente. Tenía que haber preparado un vídeo ahora que me lo han dicho. Pero bueno. Mira qué preciosidad, gente. Los elevadores, los ascensores, aquí los tienes. Bueno, están en una cubierta para abajo, vamos a verlo. Ya que me pilla cerca, vamos a verlo. Me he caminado todos los simuladores, la popa está bloqueada. Ahora vamos, que no es tan difícil. Me he bajado a cubierta, ¿verdad? Estoy un poco dormido, gente, no sé si se nota. Pero bueno, es que las 4 de la mañana. Y gente, el directo en YouTube lo voy a resubir, ¿vale? Lo voy a resubir. Supongo que lo dividiré en dos partes como pueda. Eh, lo dividiré en dos partes como pueda. Caminando el simulador y luego la simulación en sí. Mira, gente, ¿qué os parece? Una patata. ¿Qué os parece? Curioso que haya una patata. En realidad este simulador, no sé por qué, está lleno de patatas. Es una locura. Segunda clase que la película no se muestra, ¿vale? Ahora vamos, gente. Buah. Le he tenido que bajar gráficos al juego porque es que tengo un ordenador potente pero transmitiendo en YouTube y en TikTok a la vez le cuesta. Entonces le baja un poquito los gráficos, pero aún así se ve increíble. Mira esto. Mirad qué locura. Qué patata más histérico. Espero que le haga un vídeo, sí. ¿Cuánto tarda en hundirse el barco? 2 horas y 40 minutos, pero todavía no ha empezado. Empieza dentro de 25 minutos. 24 minutos, gente. Cuando falten 10 o 15, cuando sean y media, nos vamos con esta gente y os voy traduciendo a ver qué se cuentan. Lo que pueda. Vamos a ir para la popa. Ahí, que he hecho zoom sin querer. Mira, gente, segunda clase. Como buen colega te estoy viendo tanto en YouTube como en TikTok para darte visita. Gracias, Saúl, tío. Qué grande. Qué grande el tío. Aquí a las 4:15 de la mañana viéndome a mí. Igual que todos los demás. Estáis locos. Estáis loquitos. Qué comunidad. Qué gente. Sobre todo los que estáis en España. Cómo os admiro, ¿eh? La mayoría salís de Latinoamérica porque allí es más tempranito. Allí lo tenéis más fácil. Allí lo tenéis más fácil. Gente, ¿no os parece muy curioso la simetría de la White Star? Aquí te ponen el mástil y la puerta, o sea, no podían haber puesto una puerta aquí a la izquierda y otra puerta aquí a la derecha, no. Tú sales de aquí y si vas corriendo te comes el mástil de boca. Curioso cuanto menos. Gente, ahora vamos a la cabina del capitán. Vamos a aligerar un poco que quiero verlo más o menos todo y voy un poquito lento. Aunque bueno, si no da tiempo haré otro directo. Pero bueno, ya he hecho varios de estas demos. Gente, y se me ocurre si queréis hacer otro día con como supongo que subirán la simulación a YouTube, verla otra vez tranquilamente y analizarla. Vamos a tercera clase que estoy dando vueltas. Mira, gente, el comedor de segunda. ¿Cómo se llama el juego? Titanic Honor and Glory. Todo lo que vamos a ver esta noche es de esta gente. Se le ocurran mucho. Al final me dormiré. No, no, no. Tú no te duermes. Aguanta. Aguantad mis pequeños. Mis pequeños titánicos. Por así llamaros. Tampoco llevo tantos años haciendo esto. De quedarme hasta tarde. Me acuerdo este creo que es el tercer año que lo hago. O el cuarto. Me acuerdo el primero que... Que ni me dormí. Porque ahora he dormido una orilla y me he despertado. Y ya... Y ya esperaba que fuera la hora. Pero el primer año estuve... Estuve sin dormir. Y en mitad de la simulación me dormí. Y luego me desperté y me dio toda la rabia. Dije, vaya por Dios que me lo he perdido. La gente, los motores. Los motores que cuando los paran no volverán a funcionar nunca más. No volverán a ponerse en marcha nunca más. ¿Cuántas veces has visto la peli? He perdido la cuenta, la verdad. He perdido la cuenta. Ponle que unas 20 o 30. Y si sumas todas las veces que he tenido que buscar en algunos algunos trozos para hacer los vídeos, pues unas cuantas más. Pero bueno, gente, estoy viendo que no va a dar tiempo a verlo entera la de esta, pero bueno, lo importante de esta noche es la simulación. Mira, gente, tercera clase, ¿sabíais que si hoy es 14 de abril, imaginaos que estamos en el Titanic? Pues ayer por la tarde, creo, o por la noche se hizo una fiesta en tercera clase, como la que se ve en la película. La última fiesta de tercera clase. ¿Cuál es el fin del juego? Solo paseas por ahora sí, pero ahora después, en poco tiempo nos meteremos en una simulación de hundimiento en tiempo real. Queda ya nada. Lo mismo tenía que haber iniciado directo antes para explorar esto más tranquilamente. No va a dar tiempo a cocinar al final, pero bueno. No pasa nada. Gente, esta sala de calderas que vamos a entrar se la lleva por delante el iceberg entero. Esta sala de calderas el iceberg la destroza y se inunda en pocos minutos. Creo que según me han dicho, en la simulación cuando roza el iceberg se ve este interior inundándose. ¿Veis esta pared? Se la volatiliza el iceberg, la destroza y empieza a entrar por aquí toda el agua. Ve a la cabina del capitán. La cabina del capitán todavía no está hecha. Sí que está el puente de mando. Tengo 12 años y soy el único de mi grado que sabe del Titanic. Qué joven, qué joven. Oye, pues muy bien eso. No se saben ni el nombre de tus compañeros, vaya por Dios. Pues enséñales todo lo que enseño yo y que se queden flipando. Te puedes quedar ahí donde impacta el iceberg, sí, pero aquí no va a impactar. Es en la simulación, en otro vídeo. Voy a hacer el directo del directo. Vale, gente, vamos al puente y si queréis nos ponemos con esta gente a ver qué se cuentan y qué dicen. Sí, la proa está aún bloqueada todavía. ¿Por qué te gusta tanto la historia del Titanic? Pues no lo sé. Fue con 8 años, hace 12 años ya, tengo 20 años, a raíz de ver la película, dije, oye, qué interesante esto. Empecé a investigar y aquí estoy. Y, y el año pasado me abrí el canal este de TikTok con un vídeo que hice. Digo, oye, voy a hacer un vídeo a ver cuánta gente lo ve. Un vídeo así, no sé si lo habréis visto. Que así súper, está súper mal hecho realmente. Pero digo, vamos a ver cuánta gente lo ve. Y oye, resultó en 100 visitas y a partir de ahí, mira, mira la locura. ¿Qué pasaría si el Titanic se hubiese hundido por la popa? Interesante pregunta. La verdad es que no sé decirte porque todo depende de cuántos compartimentos, de las físicas, de que el barco no se vuelque. Entonces, si hubiera partido, yo creo que no. Yo creo que es más complicado. Porque hay que tener en cuenta que en la popa están los motores y tal, y eso es mucho peso extra. Con lo cual, mm, eso es lo que influyó sobre todo a partirse al barco. Entonces, si se hunde por la popa, no tiene tanto peso. Entonces creo que no se hubiera partido. Gente, el puente de mando. Y vista infinita al mar. Gracias por las donaciones otra vez, gente, en TikTok. Muchas gracias. Dicen que si hubiese impactado de frente pudiera haber salvado. Me trago, ya no sé ni hablar, gente, estoy dormidísimo. A ver, puede ser que sí. Puede ser que sí. Lo que pasa es que puede ser que hubiera afectado al barco en general. Que se hubieran doblado prácticamente todas las planchas de acero. O que el Titanic hubiese seguido avanzando, llevándose por delante al iceberg. Y al final se hubiesen hundido igual. Entonces, nunca se sabe. Depende de cada diferente, de si paran los motores o no los para, o va a menos velocidad o a más. No sé, depende de muchas cosas. Claro que hay que saber mucho de física y tal. Claro, hubiese sido un destrozo y además aquí en la pop, en la proa, está toda la gente. mm, Está toda la gente, toda la tripulación, todas las camas de la tripulación. Hubieran muerto mucha gente aquí. Menos que la gente que murió actualmente, claro. Pero, pero sí. Bueno, gente, quedan 10 minutos para el choque. Nos vamos ya con la simulación. ¿Qué os parece? Gracias por las donaciones. Muchas gracias, gente. Gracias, Saúl, hombre. Muchas gracias. Gracias, Adela, por la donación, por la rosita. Gracias, Andrés. Gracias a todo el mundo, gente. Gracias por estar aquí. No solo gracias por las donaciones, gracias por estar aquí. Bueno, gente, vámonos yendo con la simulación. Vamos yendo con la simulación. A ver. Vale. En TikTok ya se debería ver y aquí en YouTube. Esperaos, gente, que os lo pongo. Vale. Gente, ¿se ve?
Yes, of course, you looked at the lights of the ship, and then your eyes would get all messed up, and then you have to like start over again.
A
But
ver, gente que
regardless,
organiza aquí, que tengo
the
dos chats y
ship's
tengo que ver.
lighting here in this video is a little brighter. It's adjusted so that we can actually see what's happening.
Vale, gente, ¿se
I,
ve? ¿Se ve
a la
todo? ¿Se
James
escucha
Cameron,
bien?
not quite bright as the movie, but we want to be able to see what's happening to
Vale, la calidad
Titanic
está
and the
bien.
passengers aboard her. We want to be able to see the disaster unfold.
Y esa voz,
Indeed, we
la
know
gente
Titanic
inglesa que
should have
está
been
hablando, si queréis le
darker
bajo.
to your eyes, depending on what you would see, what the quote-unquote average person would witness.
Si queréis activo los subtítulos, si
for
nos
the sake
molestan
of this
mucho.
video, for this animation purposes, it's a little bit brighter. And I appreciate
Esa simulación es nueva,
pounds
es nueva. Esta
Ray
es totalmente
purchase,
nueva.
always,
La están estrenando este año.
That's not what we'll use them for, but I'm gonna DM you later, Ray, about something because I think it's gonna be funny. But yeah, I think at this point I'm done with all of my housekeeping notes, and I think it's time to talk about Titanic for the first time tonight. And
Vale, gente, van a empezar a hablar del Titanic.
Elbereth, I hope I said your name correctly. Thank you very much for that super chat to remember Titanic.
Está dando las gracias el señor por las donaciones del directo.
And where she is, and perhaps at this point in time, she's still sailing 111 years ago to her destiny.
Está navegando hace 111 años a su destino.
David, you can let me know.
11:33 approximately.
Okay, someone talk about Titanic for a moment. I have to prepare to hit the button. So.
Well,
Vale, gente, quedan 7 minutos.
33. So.
Let's talk about Titanic herself, her passengers.
¿Tú cómo hubieses actuado si hubieras estado en el hundimiento del Titanic?
Let's set up the scene, I suppose.
Voy a bajarle un poquito aquí. No lo sé, es que depende de muchas cosas. Depende de que haya mucha gente, depende de que tenga que ayudar en algún bote en caso de que pueda, depende de cómo reacciones. Depende de muchas cosas. A esta hora ya se hundió del todo, ¿no? No, todavía no ha empezado. Todavía no ha empezado. Quedan 6 minutos para que empiece. Gracias, Mercedes, por esas 3 rosas ahí en TikTok.
Stewards getting the tables ready for the next for breakfast, and I imagine in other areas you got similar things
Y
going
sí
on.
que conseguiste titulares, pues ya ves. Titulares y historia para por ahora más de 100 años. Madre mía. Y aquí estamos.
Getting ready to pass out, or maybe they've just gotten back to their cabins after a long day. And so you have people who might be changing clothes or just relaxing in their cabins before bed, maybe reading a book or something.
Dice que la gente a este punto estará leyendo un libro en su cama relajado. Los oficiales haciendo su ronda.
Captain Smith at this point is retired to his cabin.
El capitán Smith está en su cabina.
Have Murdoch on the bridge, just kind of watching out for things.
Y Murdoch en el puente.
And, you know, the guys up in the crow's nest and all of that. And it's just, you know, it's shaping up to be a nice, quiet night. Nice, quiet Sunday night. David, if you want to talk real quick.
Well, in the wireless room, I think,
acabo de escuchar en el directo David. Hay uno que se llama como yo. Parece.
30 seconds? Okay. There was a, they had a huge backlog of messages to send out because correct me if I'm wrong, it was the night before that the wireless set stopped working or
Vale, gente,
had
5
technical
minutitos.
issues. I think it was the night of the 13th.
5, 6, 4 minutitos.
I pressed.
I believe you're right.
Yes, looking at the notes here, yeah. It was the night of the 13th, and they stayed up through the night to repair the system and get it back into working order.
Vale, parece que está ya la simulación, gente.
Otherwise, they couldn't have had a means to send out the distress call.
Sí, tiene pinta de que esto ya es simulación.
They are still transmitting to Cape Race. They were overheard by the Virginians, who noted in their logs that they were standing by Cape Race, who was continuously working the Titanic.
El Titanic, el barco más grande del mundo y el objeto más grande, más
We are at 11.
más como que se mueve, ¿no? Está en su viaje a Nueva York y lleva 4 días navegando.
And now this is our new animation that Jack created with the new model in Unreal Engine 5. Yes. And it is with James's info notes that he wrote just for this. And for some reason
Dice que no volverá a ver la luz del día.
This is my first time actually seeing.
animation's a bit
Qué
loud.
bien hecho está, el barco, gente. Qué bien se ve.
Is my audio level still good?
No hay luna en el cielo, no hay olas en el mar. Gente, empieza. Elizabeth, ahí está. Gente, ¿se escucha bien o le subo el volumen?
Yes. I see it's the
Vale, el todo a
text
estribor
box
de
is
Murdoch.
for hard-decided.
So, at this point, man, the ship's about to hit the iceberg. The iceberg essentially came out of nowhere. It just, they were sailing along, and it just
Ahí está.
came up on them. And because of the moonless night and the calm seas, it's, unfortunately,
Aquí vemos
it was a very last minute thing. They didn't see the iceberg until the ship was about
en el café parisien. No se oye, no se
a good
oye,
few
le
ship
subo,
lengths
gente.
away. It happened so fast. You can see that here.
And you only have a certain amount of time to make a decision too.
Ahí está.
You can't really slow down the ship because of all the momentum that's behind it.
Vale, van a hacer recuento de daño.
If you signaled the engines to stop, the ship wouldn't stop. It would take a bit for it to slow to a halt.
No se escucha. ¿Por qué no se escucha, gente? Aquí
If
en...
only that text message had gotten to the bridge in time. As in, I heard someone's phone go off. But yeah, that was that was the.
Shouldn't it be mine?
Anyway, that was our new iceberg collision.
Ahí se escucha mejor, gente.
Yeah,
en
the
TikTok.
iceberg. There's been many debates, plural, about the iceberg collision, ranging from binoculars to engines full astern to colliding directly into the iceberg, and it's
Vale,
debates
perfecto,
will go
gente.
on regardless of
Vale, vale,
the
vale.
number of theories put forward, the number of final says, etc. That's the way with Titanic. That no matter what
Desactiva esto un ratito.
hypotheses are presented, we're going to always have these debates which rage regarding the many aspects, because we'll probably discuss this many times during the night. We want someone or something that we can blame for the disaster. We want one aspect, I think, which makes it easier for us to put just a target on to say, well, if they had spotted the iceberg sooner,
Vale, gente,
everything
pues
would
ya han
have gone better.
chocado.
We would have not had the tragedy. If they weren't going so fast, we would have
Acaban de dar
missed
la
it, but
orden de parar los motores,
this is why
creo.
we have a disaster. It's because all these small things build up, all these one little errors happen, that you have a tragedy on such a grand scale. That's just my opinion, of course, on the matter.
Yeah, I think that could be said
Vale.
across history.
El cuarto oficial
For
Vauxhall
most historic
empieza una
events,
inspección de daño
it's rare that there's just one
y los motores
thing they
están
can do and say,
a la mitad de velocidad, básicamente.
that's what caused.
Todavía no han
It's
mandado
all-
parar
it's
los motores.
Always, there's a lot of different reasons that things like this have happened over the course of history.
¿A qué hora corresponde? ¿La hora americana o la hora europea?
Titanic
A
had
la hora
way
de Nueva York,
Southampton,
porque es como estaba más cerca de allí.
the near collision with the SS City of New York.
Parece que es la hora de allí, sí.
Who knows? Maybe that.
Aunque ahora hay un cambio de hora extraño. Yo creo que ahora
made the difference, but
en Nueva York son las 10 y 40, no las 11 y 40. No sé, esto de la hora a mí me lía un poco, la verdad.
It's one of the biggest aspects of the Titanic disaster, that when people talk about it, a lot of people forget to take off their 20X glasses, the year that they're in glasses, when they look back at the tragedy, and they forget that they're looking at it with the hindsight, that they need to remember that they're looking at it knowing that it is a disaster.
A quick note for people in the chat. You know, we're
Dice que
obviously going to be doing
que
a
los
lot of
motores del
commentary
barco se van a
tonight.
parar y
The
que debido a que
purpose
no
of
la
this,
colisión ha sido muy
you know,
suave,
obviously we're not just going to be like
la mayoría de
sitting here
pasajeros y
watching the
tripulación no saben,
but
no se percatan del peligro.
version will be up soon, so that way if you want to hear the sounds and stuff and enjoy it
Right.
without us
¿De
rambling
ahí sabes cuándo
around,
volverá a
you'll
bajar
get to do that.
para
Yeah, when there are
grabar nuevas imágenes?
quote unquote
Pues
exciting events,
se
I guess
supone
you
que
could
todos
say,
los
or
veranos
important
bajan un
events,
poco, bajan y hacen algo.
like the end of Titanic, when the ship finally sinks.
Bajan
I
y
suppose. Spoiler
graban
alert,
cosas.
everybody. I hate saying that joke at this point. We will stay quiet for the final moments of the ship sinking, or when the band plays "Near My God to Thee." Another spoiler alert. We'll stay quiet for that final plunge. But the majority of the disaster, like in a few moments, when the steam starts
el barco
coming
también
out of the funnel, like
da
right now,
reversa como un carro, sí.
if you want
También va
to
marcha atrás.
hear just the steam being ejected from Titanic's funnels for the next hour and a half, or how long it takes, sure.
Vale, están
but it's
ventilando
going to be doing this for
el
a
vapor
very
para que las calderas
long
no
time.
exploten.
Because
Con el
now let's
contacto
talk
del
about
agua.
that. Why is this occurring, guys? I guess because the ship has stopped. The captain has, well, spoiler alert right now, it just answered it for me. Thanks, James. But the captain noticed that the ship has a list to starboard, or the trim is off, and this is enough to stop the ship for the last final time. And all that steam that has been generated thanks to the boilers has to go somewhere. It can't go to the engine.
Vale, dice que por el
the
ruido
turbine
los pasajeros
anymore.
prefieren quedarse dentro y
It
que
has
eso
to
no
be
conviene,
taken up and out.
porque no
Otherwise, you have a dangerous
va a haber
situation.
peligro, la gente no
And
sabe que va a haber peligro.
The only place it has to go is through the emergency pipes on the sides of the funnel, and its steam can be very loud.
Oh yeah, and even inside the ship, because in the wireless room, it made it really hard for them to hear um, the initial communications that they had with other ships once they, although that's a little ways off now,
Right.
Before they start sending the distress call, but it made hearing those first exchanges.
No olvidemos que esto estaba pasando justo ahora hace 111 años.
The pipes lead all the way, start down in the boiler rooms and go all the way up to the top of the funnel. So it has to traverse through essentially passenger quarters and crew compartments. So they're hearing this steam travel throughout the entire sections of the ship. You might not hear it in the very stern or bow of the ship as well as you would hear it on top of the boat deck or amidships. And as David was saying, the wireless compartments, the Marconi operating room, is right dab smack between funnels 1 and 2. So they're not in a good position to be soundproof at all. So they need to be able to hear this noise of a dirt, 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 and they have to deal with this roaring of steam above them. And I just read in the chat, why aren't people panicking right now? Well, because
Gente, también creo
I'm not making a joke, they're on Titanic.
que eso de dar marcha atrás fue un error.
There was this feeling
Porque al dar marcha atrás
the ship, that nothing could happen to the ship.
la hélice central no
Look at it right
no
now,
funcionaba.
sitting there. I mean, it's got a list to,
Y claro, la hélice central es la que mejor hace girar al barco. Lo mismo si le hubieran dado marcha atrás hubieran girado mejor y pudieran haberlo esquivado. No digo que fuera seguro, pero posiblemente.
to the passengers that it's leaning one way or the other.
Right. You did not have a ship of this size have it sink yet in history. There's never been a disaster of any proportion. We can talk about Captain Smith, for instance, who had said that ships had gotten so large and so safe, and technology had improved. This is the age of when the Industrial Revolution has reached an apex, that mankind has essentially dominated nature and the elements. Titanic is a metaphor for mankind's ability to triumph over what I don't want to say it right now, but yet, the expression was God himself could not sink the ship because what we could create at the time was
Bueno,
unparalleled
servía
to anything else
como
that
ventilación
we
también
had
de las
built before.
cocinas.
All we could
Para
imagine was that
ventilación del
creation
barco.
from our hands was just going up and up and up, and we were only proving that with first Oceanic and Lusitania, and there's the first of our interior flooding shots. We're seeing when the baggage
Mira,
spaces,
gente, ahí hemos estado hace un momento
these ships were getting safer and safer,
en el juego,
bigger and
la
larger.
sala de cargo.
Even Lusitania and Mauritania before Titanic and Olympic were called unsinkable. That's one thing that's not mentioned
La
that
sala del
often,
cargo.
because Lusitania and Mauritania before Titanic did not sink, but it was Titanic, which was called unsinkable, did sink, and that's why it's known in infamy as the unsinkable ship which sank.
Yeah, the designation unsinkable or practically unsinkable or anything along those lines seemed to be used for almost every ship. Maybe I'm being a little too broad there, but it was used
Right.
when a lot of new ships were coming out. There was for example, the Carmania and the Coronia, when they were launched in I think 1905, 1906. I can't remember right off the top of my head. They were right before Lusitania and Mauritania, but their safety features were heavily advertised, and they were even called practically unsinkable. And a note that I'd like to make is that there was some real world events that had happened that probably played in the minds of some people in believing that these ships were stronger.
Right.
And almost like the one that I think of is the sinking of the Republic in 1909. Another White
Gente, ya
Star
se empieza a ver
miner who
inclinación,
was struck
si os fijáis bien.
by another ship in fog, the
Está un poco
SS
escorado.
Sparta. And the only people lost were those in the initial collision of the two ships. Everybody else, the ship sank so slowly that they were able to get everybody off the ship. Help was right around the corner with the help of the wireless, and they got everybody off.
Technology again improving so much that they had the ability to call for help. The ship was safe enough that it sank slowly, like you said. That the evacuation didn't have to be a rapid, quick event, and that's what they would. And if anything happened to this ship,
Ponte la música, me gustaría poner música, gente, pero en
like the
YouTube,
lifeboats, for instance,
si pongo música me cierran el
a ship
stream.
would arrive that would be close enough, and they would use
Por
the
eso no puedo.
lifeboats to transfer passengers back and forth between the ship in peril and the rescue ship.
Pone imágenes por dentro, sí, han puesto alguna nueva.
People at the time period.
Según dicen hay 30 en todo el hundimiento.
Keeping all that in
Veremos.
mind, if you are on the Titanic back in 1912, you have no reason to think that a collision would necessarily mean the ship's going to sink. If anything, they probably thought, well, it's almost like the story that we've heard over the years. You'll be back
Ya
on
se
the
nota
board
la
before
inclinación,
breakfast.
gente.
I mean,
Exactly.
it was very much that kind of thinking.
It was just an inconvenience to a lot of passengers, and something that they didn't want to deal with. That we'll be able to read in James' info notes that he puts on the screen at points too. And
I see the lights on the horizon.
Of the ship that is oh so tantalizingly close, yet too far. David, a little bit closer to your microphone again.
Mira, hasta han puesto personillas.
But thank you.
I wonder if I should switch.
Hasta han puesto personitas.
I'm going to mute myself and switch real quick.
No se mueven, pero hombre, le da ahí.
So, as we go around the boat deck I'll say right now again, on Kyle's dollhouse model, I think the time just said it was 12:55. No, I'm sorry, 11:55 a.m.
Toma, Andrew está haciendo una inspección y llega a las escaleras de la sala de correo que está inundada.
The chief designer for the Harlan Wolff ship builder company.
Los carteros están intentando salvar las cartas.
And he would look down into the post office, the mail room, and he's witnessed the mail clerks trying to save bags of mail.
Ahí estaban las cartas.
And it's a futile effort, but they were dedicated to their work as they were bringing up heavy, soaked, full bags of postage from the flooding mailroom into the post office and then up into E-deck, into empty cabins to try to save the Royal Mail that was heading from the UK to the US. Because that was their duty, that was their job, and they were trying to save the mail. But he can tell at that point that the ship is probably doomed. Here we see that the iceberg has left chunks of ice on the forward well deck.
Vale, la gente vuelve a sus cabinas a jugar a las cartas
and many of the third class passengers who came up to
algunos de tercera
investigate
clase han
what
estado
that
jugando al fútbol con hielo.
noise was who discovered the ice on the
Mira
foresail
eso,
deck,
la suite.
had a little bit of sport and
La
fun
suite
kicking the ice around. But many first-class passengers who were
B51.
not awoken by the iceberg collision, but perhaps by
Creo que
the
era.
stopping
Ahí
of
está.
the engines or the escaping of the steam, the loud noise of the
Esta se
steam.
supone que es la cabina de
They
los,
would
de los
had
abuelitos
summoned their
estos que
stewards
salen en la
perhaps, and their
película de los
stewards would
estragos.
come to their cabin, answering their calls, telling them that everything is fine at this point. It's okay. Please go back to bed. We possibly have lost a propeller blade. We might have stopped for ice for the night because they have not been given orders yet to abandon ship. But deep down below, in the lowest areas of their accommodation in first class, such as here on G
Va
deck,
como muy rápida
where
la,
this
la
watch
inundación.
fort is
Madre
located,
mía.
certain passengers have noticed that it is flooding.
How's my level now?
Now you're sounding like a robot again, like last year. Not a robot, but you got a little bit of a metallic twinge. Which is appropriate because we were just in a room that was sinking.
Tiene mucho interior, gente. Me
Another
está
area
gustando
of
mucho.
the crew, which is flooding fast. Cargo hatch number 1, looking down into it. Down into the cargo hold. It was flooding. The third class
that
accommodations.
was observed by a lot of different people, including I think even Third Officer Pittman at one point made his way down there and saw the water around the hatch coatings on G deck.
Is that the one where they heard air escaping from, or was that a different?
That was the four-peak tank.
Four-peak tank.
Yeah, lamp trimmer Hemmings.
It was Hemmings, yes, thank you.
Yeah, he
Siguen
heard
ventilando
the
las
air
calderas.
escaping from the vent pipe. He heard that.
Estamos a punto de medianoche.
So the air has to go somewhere as the water fills the inside of the ship. And that's one thing that we might forget about, is that the ship, as the ship fills up, the air has to leave. And that's a suspicious sound to many of the crew, especially in the forward area of the ship. The crew is the very forward section of the ship under the forecastle, the front deck of the ship that's shaped like a V with all the equipment on there is called the forecastle deck, and underneath that's where the firemen, the trimmers, their accommodations are, even their eating area. That's where their berth. So they're sleeping there if they're off duty. So that's the area that
they're all awake now.
They're all awake now because that's what they're flooding. That area of the ship is flooding, and it's midnight Titanic time. 12 a.m. Monday, April 15th, 1912. A lot of third-class passengers were awoken by the collision with the iceberg because the iceberg was hitting the ship in their accommodations. Third class was berthed on G deck, F deck, E deck, and D deck forward, right under the well deck, right under the forecastle, deck, underneath the forward funnel, and also in the stern on those same decks. But a lot of third class passengers were in
Dice que la esperanza de que el haya hecho poco daño en el barco se va. Plan que ya no lo tienen, ya no hay esperanza.
And those third-class passengers started to collect up their belongings and head aft along the working alleyway known as Scotland Road to meet up with their fellow third-class passengers to escape the flooding waters to the third-class common rooms under the poop deck, just to
La gente sigue en su espacio de primera
many
clase.
other passengers and crew who witnessed all these escaping passengers, there's the steerage passengers, some of them mocked them, thinking, well, why are they running away with all this baggage, all this luggage, satchels over their backs? But of course this is everything they've ever owned in their entire lives, because they're leaving their home countries, they're leaving their entire lives for a brand new one, so they have to take that with them. They can't just leave it, because that's everything they have. Now the first class passengers who are awake at this point, who are investigating, or who have been awoken and aroused by their friends, etc., they're meeting up in different areas of the ship. Mostly they're public spaces because it's very cold out on deck. It's cold and loud. The temperature.
The
Qué locura
depiction in
de animación, gente. Está muy currada, ¿eh?
The Cameron film, but A Night to
Está muy
Remember,
currada. Es imposible sacarlo, pues tiene pinta. Sobre todo porque está muy deteriorado. Tú si tocas...
You have to shout, you have
Tú
to
si lo
yell.
tocas ahí abajo se desintegra. Yo creo que solo queda la forma
one
del
of their
barco.
whistles to try to get the attention of each other or other crew members. But there's
Vale, acaban de
not
ordenar
much-
que los
not much
botes,
else you could do besides scream at
que
that point,
que se ríen
because
los
the steam
botes.
escaping from the top of the funnels is deafening. And we have the beginning of the evacuation proper, with the lifeboats being cranked out. Now,
Había más botes de los que la ley
takes quite
requería.
some time to actually lower a lifeboat. In a couple years back, James Cameron, since he's James Cameron, and he had
Eso es más de los
an actual
de los que el
set
Titanic
of
tiene
davits,
tiempo de rey.
Llewellyn davits, and lifeboats. He was able to test
Faltaron dos
how
por
long
arriba.
it would take to
Y de milagro.
fully lower a lifeboat, to crank it out, and to first to raise it up, to move the davits out, and then to lower the lifeboats. It's not just a quick minute to get it down that entire long drop from the boat deck all the way to the ocean below. It's probably a terrifying experience, especially for a passenger who moments earlier would seemingly be on the safe, sturdy, warm, brightly lit RMS Titanic. And
Mira Lalo cómo se
we'll find
refleja
out
debajo del
later
bote.
that's why a lot of
Es que
people
está muy bien hecho.
were reluctant to get into these small, dingy crafts. And that's why they were not full. These lifeboats, which could hold 65 passengers, the majority of them, very few of them would have more than 40 passengers.
Meanwhile, down in the ship, the water is rapidly rising in some areas. By 12:02 a.m., there was water within sight of F deck by the mailroom. So already by then, I guess the mailroom's already flooded.
Completely flooded.
Me gusta cómo
Flooding.
están hechas las
Or
personillas.
flooding.
Son muy simples, pero en realidad están bien, ¿eh?
That I've mentioned this in other chats, but the that stairwell from E deck looking down to the mailroom, and then right around the corner you have the squash court. That's just down the hall from D deck reception room in first class. So
Vale, están
you didn't
preparando
have
los
to
botes.
necessarily
Yo,
go
gente,
very far inside the ship within that.
Están
this
preparando los
first,
botecitos.
half hour to see water coming in.
Oh no, not at all. If a first class passenger wanted to see the seriousness
Vale,
of the
mientras le
situation,
quitan las lonas, ponen provisiones dentro del bote.
there
Dice
was
que
not
tardarán un poco.
a distance between them and the flooding of their area too. I think it was Alfred. I never can say his last name. Nurney.
I think that's how you
Yeah, Alfred Nurney. I call him the Baron because he had this whole alias, I believe, where he
Baron von
Baron-
Dratch.
yes, where he made his way from second class to first class, didn't he? But regardless, he
Kind of complained, I think, about his accommodations and got upgraded.
right, but he ventured down to the squash courts. I think a couple of minutes ago, and he noticed that he didn't go down into the squash court because it was flooding, and he found about 6 feet of water he walked to the gallery above, and he saw that it was 6 feet deep, and he knew right then it was a serious situation, and perhaps using his skills and perhaps not, he got into one of the first lifeboats, I think, either 7 or 5, I want to say. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I think it was one of the lifeboats on the starboard side. But again, that was, we'll discover soon when those lifeboats start lowering that lifeboats on one side of the ship were slightly more filled than lifeboats on the other side, and one side, the rules were women and children first versus women and children only, and that's not the fault
Qué guay, se va viendo
of
cómo van,
an
cómo van
officer
preparando
or
cada bote
it's
individualmente.
that's just how it
Mira, ya hay más
one person
gentecilla afuera.
interpreted it versus the other, and when that happens, we'll start discussing that, because I feel that often blame gets placed on certain officers, and I don't think that's fair, but to be discussed.
And again, some of even the officers didn't necessarily know that the ship was due.
Oh yeah.
So there wasn't this.
Hay mucha gente en la parte de arriba.
There wasn't this urgency.
Están ahí agrupados.
Early on, maybe to put as many people in as they could.
Cómo van arriando los botes.
Because, again, they thought that maybe help
Cómo
would
los
be
van
right
poniendo
around
ahí en el aire.
the corner.
Eso tiene que ser
And,
chungo, gente.
or they
Pues
would
si
get the situation
os ponéis en un
resolved,
lado del bote,
the ship would
el otro,
probably sink to a certain
sí.
point and then stop.
como no
Because that's the
vaya
point of the
equilibrando
watertight
personas,
compartments and bulkheads, is that
cuidado.
the water would rise to certain points in the watertight compartment essentially to the water line.
Mira,
And the ship
segunda clase, gente.
level out, and then the water would stop rising, and that would be it. That was essentially in
Mira
a
que los
nutshell, that
pasajeros
was
de
how
segunda
watertight
clase están
compartments
también en
were
su
supposed to work.
espacio
And then, as we
y
discussed
que
before, as David said, the
están
ships would
intentando
come
llegar arriba,
thanks
pero
to the wireless and
el ascensor no
help to be there.
funciona.
But at this point, the first distress call has not even gone out yet, because they're still carrying
Las
out
700
their
personas de tercera clase
They're still getting
están,
inspection, and we don't have
delante y detrás del barco.
a location of
Son
the ship yet.
muchas
either, correct? I think Fox
muchas
is still
muchas
working on
lenguas.
his,
En plan,
the
tienen
coordinates
muchas
for the-
lenguas
where the ship is located.
y les cuesta
We all
organizarse
know that
y que nunca se les presta
his
suficiente atención.
his first go at it will be slightly inaccurate. And
Yeah, the first position that gets worked out is, I believe, 41, 46, it might be 44 north, 50, 24 west. And I believe that position was worked out by Smith, and then Boxhall later spoke to Smith after they started
Solo han pasado
sending
30
the
minutos
distress
desde la
call
colisión
and what position they
y el agua se ve
given
cerca de la cubierta, después de haber inundado en la sala de correo completamente.
Boxhall recalculated, and then he took it.
And then he took
The,
it.
the famous 41,
46, 50, 14.
which we now know is about, I forget how many miles west of where she actually was.
Just a bit off, right? Yeah.
About 13 miles, maybe. Clock says 12:10.
My animation says 12:11. What are we gonna do? No. We're still at this point. We'll summarize the situation here at the Titanic's current location. I mean, she's stopped. Her engines are never going to start up again. She stopped
Gente, ¿qué os va
after hitting
pareciendo?
an iceberg,
¿Qué os parece?
and her boats are being
Está
swung
súper
out
bien,
and ready to be filled.
Está muy currado.
But the captain has not ordered them to be filled with women and children yet. The passengers have been aroused from their cabins, but they're reluctant to go out on deck because, one, it is cold outside. The temperature is around freezing or below freezing in the air, and you have steam from the boilers escaping from the tops of the funnels, and it is a very deafening noise. And so passengers who are already hesitant to go out onto the open decks because of these two factors, and because they are on Titanic herself, which is this unsinkable ship.
¿Cuántos botes eran en total?
We
20.
have created
Sí, tenía el peso de 70 hombres, pero y también
the
subieron
safest,
algunos hombres.
innovative
Hay muchos testimonios
piece
que
of
subí en
technology
vídeos que sí que son
ever
hombres,
constructed.
de segunda, de primera clase.
I think it's
Incluso un
almost time
mayordomo.
though, for one of the first wireless messages to be sent requesting help, though.
Yes, at 12:15, which is in 2 minutes from now, Captain Smith will go into the wireless room and tell the wireless operators, both of whom, Harold Bride and Jack Phillips, are awake at this point. Yep, and I just saw the thing come on the screen. Yep, he tells them to prepare to
Dale,
send
acabas de
the
decirle
first
el
CTV,
capitán a los,
That's it.
a los telegrafistas que envíen
but to also hold off until he tells them
ayuda,
specifically.
que pidan ayuda.
And at 12 a.m., both Quartermaster Hitchens and
Ahí pone una
Bruce's
frase que dijo el
Captain
capitán,
Smith give the,
que no sé qué condición
order
puede
to
hundir un barco o algo así. O sea,
have
no
the passengers
encuentro nada que
located.
pueda hundir un barco. Eso lo dijo hace unos años. Y mira lo que le pasó con el Titanic.
Now,
Qué ironía, ¿verdad?
as they're a quick thing about as they're preparing the lifeboat, this is as we said earlier, it's a very complicated process, and there's quite a few steps. So, for example, you had to prepare all the equipment in the lifeboats. You had to kind of get all the oars out. You had to get the covers off. The covers would have had all these little clamps and stuff that you had to remove, tie downs and stuff. There were chains that held the boats to the deck. You had to undo those. There were chocks that held up the boats over the deck. You had to undo those, hinge them down. You had to get all the ropes in place. You had to pull the boats up a little bit. You had to swing them out. You had to do all the cranking on the davits. And those things moved very slowly. Most of the boats, you had to move railings. And you had to send people to go get provisions and lanterns, which I believe, despite what we show in Demo 401, we actually now
Están hablando
believe
ahora
that stuff
de la
was
demo y
kept
de
aft,
cosillas.
somewhere aft on the boat deck.
I think they were under the fourth funnel now.
Oh boy.
Oh, Kyle, I have to mute you for a minute, or I have to mute us all because we have
La banda
one
empieza a
of
tocar.
the first pieces of music playing, and I want us all to listen to it while it plays.
Gente, ¿sabíais la canción final que toca la banda? Hay varias teorías, hay varias versiones de la canción. Creo que en esta, según he visto en un tráiler que sacaron de esta animación, ponen la que no es tan... la que no es tan usual, en plan la que no se ve en la película, es como parecida, pero no es la misma. Supongo que la última la reconoceréis. Esta supongo que estarán registradas en algún lado, de algunos supervivientes que la escucharan en este orden. O sea que supongo que será tal cual.
Alright, Kyle, let's go. Let's discuss back the lifeboats. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Cerca de ti,
Whatever.
señor,
Yeah,
no,
but-
sí, exactamente, esa es la última.
Yeah, we went through a great effort to get this music, so it is very lovely.
It's by a wonderful composer whose name I'm going to totally ruin, but it's from Eej. Oh, I never actually asked him how to pronounce his name, but that's okay because my name is terrible. It's too unclear. From Eej Oh dear, I'm sorry, Eej.
I believe it's Erdogan. It's like
Erdogan.
the French Turkey.
He's from Turkey. Yes, Eej Erdogan. And there's going to be a lot more tracks that I hope he creates for Project 401 and for Titanic Honor and Glory. And I'm excited for you all to hear them as they come up and he creates them.
Gente, que estoy
So, yeah,
hablando en
and
los
a lot of,
comentarios, sois muy sádicos.
super rare tracks too.
Relajad un poco, hombre.
Are from Titanic's in the White Star Line songbook that
No digáis
haven't
cosas
been heard
raras.
in, I think over 100 years. So stay tuned for that. everybody.
Tranquilito.
I'm very interested to hear that.
Yeah, I am too. He's excited too.
We love our music. And I imagine the crew did too, as they were getting these lifeboats ready.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they would have had to go all over the place to gather these supplies. They also, all the lifeboats also had these plugs in the bottoms. And, so the rainwater and stuff would drain out. And later on, when some of the boats were lowered, they found that they forgot to put these plugs in. The boats would a couple of the boats started flooding a bit, and they had to rush to get the plugs in. And
I believe that when in boat number 6, when Arthur Pushin
Mira, una superviviente de segunda clase.
got down into the boat, that was one of the things that Quartermaster
Dice
Dickens
que-
said to him. Make sure
De
the
hecho,
plugs in.
creo que esta tengo un relato de
and
ella.
of course,
Me suena el apellido.
the design called
Dice que
for
no,
lifeboats to
que
be lowered
lo-
down to A deck to be loaded. But of course, on
Que
Titanic, that would prove
la
challenging,
tripulación iba diciendo que no había
particularly
peligro, que no había peligro.
It
So
would really mess up the
Normal, si es que al
Filling
principio
up
del
like
hundimiento no
four.
hay sensación de querer
4
evacuar.
was lowered down to A deck.
Luego
and
cuando
then
ya el
it
agua
was
te está
sitting there
llegando por
for
las rodillas y así.
quite some time while they waited for a crewman to go fetch a key.
Ya
that was
ahí ya
needed
sí tienes
to
prisa.
open the windows on A deck.
It was one of the last. Was it one of the last boats to finally be launched?
a 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, 4
I think
was.
it was very late. in
It was
the
very
season.
late. Yeah, I think it was the second to last boat on the port side. Correct me if I'm wrong. Later on, I don't. If only we had Mr. Halpern here, he would tell us right away. I think it was the second to last boat on the starboard side.
Yeah,
Sorry, port side.
I
Excuse
think
me.
So.
I think so.
Port side.
Port side. Yeah.
Medio barco hundido diciendo que no había peligro. Ya, sé que está en un barco con la mayor
Yeah,
tecnología del
'cause I
momento,
think-
¿no?
I think
No
it went
crees
on
que
the
se vaya a
port
hundir.
side,
De hecho, mucha
last
gente lo
10
creía hasta el
for
último momento.
D.
No se
I
lo
don't
creía.
randomly know that, but yeah, 10-4-D.
And it's right around now. Just said 12:21 on the screen. It's right around now that Thomas Andrews was seen by a couple of people running up basically the forward grand staircase to the bridge. He was observed by William Sloper and Anna Warren.
Ya hay más gente en la cubierta.
Apparently taking the steps.
Yo ya
3
estaría
at a time.
asustado porque está inclinado, ¿eh?
I think you're gonna see that pop up on the screen in like a moment or so.
Oh,
Yeah.
I jumped the gun.
That's okay. You're allowed to do that. It's fine. You're allowed to do that. But yeah, I mean, James, you gave James some feedback on his historical. Oh, there it is.
There it is.
There it is, everybody. Thomas Andrews has seen all he needs. He is spotted briskly making his way to the bridge. Now we didn't write down that he
Was
taking 3 steps at a time up the grand staircase, but I could imagine.
A
Gosh,
Tom
I can
Andrews
imagine
se le
him
ve
needing to
yendo
do
al
that.
puente,
So, yeah.
dice.
I do think we have the sloper
One
boat.
can only imagine what it was what it must have been like for him to have that realization that things were that bad, and just the horror he must have felt.
Right. He knows this. It should go without saying that he knows the situation, the whole situation, from the fact that how long the ship has, the number of boats, and he possibly knows how many passengers and crew are on board. So he has the whole perspective. He has the whole understanding of what's going to happen and when it's going to happen in his mind. So the only variable he has now is when he can have the evacuation begin and how long until he can get half the passengers off. And it seems like it all relies on him to get that message to the bridge so that it can begin. So him taking 3 steps at a time up the grand staircase, sprinting to the bridge to tell the captain to evacuate now, is... gosh, he was probably doing everything he possibly could at that point. It's a very
¿Dónde están
scary
los oficiales para empezar la evacuación?
when
Están
you try
ahí,
to put yourself in the mind of
están ahí
some
preparando
of the
los botes.
passengers and crew.
Now it's around this time, I believe, around 12:25, when there's a meeting at least between Smith and Andrews on the bridge, and Andrews essentially tells Smith that the first 6 compartments were breached, though the 6th one, I don't think we discussed the damage really. So basically, the forepeak tank was breached. The two, some of the forward cargo compartments, boiler room 6, and boiler room 5.
I think it's 2 feet or so into that coal bunker in the forward end
Yes.
of boiler room 5.
Yeah, so the forward end of boiler room 5, a couple of feet into the coal bunker, the very same coal bunker where there was that coal fire earlier in the voyage. I guess that would have been convenient if it was still going. But yeah, there was a very small breach into boiler room 5. However, the pumps were able to keep ahead for that area. So boiler
Vale,
room
gente,
5
aquí
stayed dry
a
for
este
a while
punto es
yet.
cuando sale en la película
Fortunately,
Andrews diciendo que le quedan
the 5 compartments were
le
more
queda
than
tiempo
enough
limitado al
to take the
Titanic,
ship down, and
que no
that was
que no se
basically
puede
the point
salvar,
of Andrews when he tells
que hagan lo que hagan
Captain
se va a ir al fondo
around
del
this
Atlántico.
time that these 5 compartments flooding are going to lead to the water spilling over the bulkheads, and that the ship cannot survive this scenario, because there were a number of scenarios. They even had these plans put together for the different combinations of compartments for the ship that could be
Gente,
flooded
por
for the
favor,
ship
un
still
poco de
safe,
respeto
stay
en los
afloat.
comentarios de YouTube,
Most
que os
of
veo
the
muy
combinations were 2 compartments.
desconcentrado.
Here that Titanic was rated for 2 compartment flooding. That's apparently a very common thing. But there were other scenarios where
Un
you could
poco de
have up
respeto,
to
por
4
favor.
compartments, such as the ones all the way forward, I believe aft, and also a combination of compartments in the middle of the ship, such as the engine room. And unfortunately,
They
none
hadn't
of them.
taken into account that side swipe that long side swipe kind of collision that could open up
Yeah.
a whole stretch of the ship.
Yeah, they never would have been. I mean, 4 would have been unthinkable. The 5 compartments, 6, absolutely absurd. So, yeah, there was no scenario where this could survive. It was just doomed. And Smith was told that.
Que estamos aquí viendo esto
And Andrews
y
calculated the Titanic.
no
maybe
sé,
had
esto
about
estaba pasando
an
hace
hour, hour and a
111
half.
años.
And yeah, from that point on, Smith.
Mira, gente, el primer mensaje de auxilio.
More or less when he gave the order to put women and children into the lifeboats. And this was overheard, I believe, by John Poindexter.
Gracias, gente.
Yes. Who had just come up from E-Deck, where the wooden bulkheads in their sleeping quarters had given way.
It collapsed from water.
And the first distress signals are now going out. The first stations to hear this signal, Cape Race heard it at 10:25 Eastern time. I think Frankfurt was also one of the first ships to hear it, but
Mirad
they
qué vista
missed
aérea más
the
guapa.
beginning of the transmission.
Mira eso, qué
They
chulo.
didn't hear the CQD, and the operator aboard
Vi
the
una nube
Frankfurt
en el
seemed
horizonte,
to
¿sí o qué?
think that it was
¿Dónde?
merely what they called
El California.
I think it's not a time rush. I'm forgetting the exact.
¿Os imagináis que los vienen a rescatar y la historia es diferente?
Here, the ship identified themselves. They gave their position, and the other ship would do the same in response. So
Right. They didn't understand.
Frankfurt's operator went off to the bridge and sort of took his time about it because he didn't realize the severity or seriousness of the situation. And I believe Mount Temple also heard their call, but the Titanic could not hear the Mount Temple's response due to probably.
Pues sí, no estaríamos aquí hoy hablando de esto.
Is the steam still escaping?
It is.
overhead?
It is
Es
still.
curioso
Yeah.
lo que es la vida, ¿eh?
And I think they actually, the Mount Temple's operator noted in his logs that Titanic could not hear him.
Should be noted that Mount Temple is on
La
the
prueba está
other
empezando a
side of the
sumergirse,
ice
no,
field
todavía
that
no,
Titanic
todavía le queda un
just
poco.
entered, I believe.
Yes.
For further.
Realmente la prueba, cuando se empieza a hundir la
further
prueba, ya empieza a tomar
discussions
velocidad.
later, I probably
O sea que
remember.
todavía le
Yeah,
queda un poco.
I believe Mount Temple.
Le quedan,
Does she try to reach Titanic later on in the night, or does she not?
puede que una hora y
She
media.
decided-
No, she was en route.
Quedan
She
10
was,
minutos para que se cumplan,
I have to pull up a map. But she was
para
en
que se
route,
cumplan
and
She's
I think
una hora de la
close
came
colisión.
across the ice field.
Yeah, she did. That I remember.
Yeah. She came upon the ice field, and they sort of came to a stop because the captain of the Mount Temple had, I think, about 1,400 passengers
Yes.
aboard her.
And it became dangerous, did it not?
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate thing about that is the captain of Mount Temple kind of had to make this decision: do we press through the ice field to try and get to Titanic and risk the lives of of Mount Temple's passengers, or do they wait for conditions to improve and or it to become daylight and continue to work their way through?
Carpathia, which we'll get the distress call shortly, even though she's further away, she's coming from the southeast, I want to
Buah, mirad qué
say
vista,
from memory.
madre mía.
And the ice field is not in that direction.
Ya está la
whatsoever,
situación más,
so
más delicada, ¿eh?
she
Mira eso,
doesn't have to worry so much about
mira eso.
the intensity of the float ice, all the icebergs. She did see some ice, but she doesn't have to steam through as much danger as, for example, Mount Temple, or even if Californian, for instance, had seen the messages, got her engines started up immediately, and pressed on through the ice field, perhaps, which is another big topic of debate, perhaps, if she was able to get there in time, all things considered, with the ice and the amount of delay that would happen with her boilers being cold.
Now, I'm not sure if her boilers were exactly cold. I seem to recall that
Y las bengalas,
Ford might have left
un
some
poco más
orders
tarde.
to keep some steam on in case they had to.
Todavía no han bajado ni un
start
bote,
moving
parece.
again.
Tardan mucho.
It's been a little bit since I've looked at
I've
it.
never looked into the Californian, so
I imagine they would have needed to keep.
well,
some
obviously
boilers going
for
power.
power, yes, but as I know that you don't need to have all your boilers on for power, but I don't know how. Californian's not that large of a vessel, so I imagine she doesn't have that many boilers to begin with.
I think she only had maybe 1 or 2 boiler rooms max.
Yes.
Very, much smaller ship than even Carpathia. I
She
think.
was, right. I will be honest, I haven't read a book about California in a very long time.
A couple of
I
side
highly
notes.
recommend Samuel Halpern's book on the subject.
I do own it, however, I have not read that one.
It can. I know it's very technical at times,
Yes.
but it is the evidence.
Dice
that
que
he
el
presents
oficial
in that book
Vauxhall
is very
proporciona a los
We can-
operadores,
We are mentioning, once again,
a los
Samuel
telegrafistas,
Halpern's
coordenadas
book.
actualizadas
If
y
you can remember
continúan
the
con la
exact name
búsqueda
of
de
it,
un barco
I believe it's Strangers on the
que los
Horizon.
pueda
Yeah, that's it.
socorrer.
Yeah. Strangers on the Horizon.
I'm actually staring at it right now from
Okay.
across the room.
Now, Kyle, what were you saying a second ago? Sorry.
A couple of side notes. I'm not sure if we discussed. First is around the time the lifeboats were starting to be loaded, there was the women and children first thing that was in
Perfect
place.
thing to bring up. Good.
Yo creo que hubiera empeorado la situación,
So
eso de avanzar.
at the
como
time,
dice un
it was a
comentario.
common idea
Lo mismo
to
le
have
pasó al
an
Britannic. El
emergency,
Britannic, cuando le
ensure
impactó la
safety of
mina,
women and children.
siguió
You know, this idea
avanzando
that,
y se hundió más rápido.
Children and women
Y eso
were
crea un agujero, imaginaos
the more
una
vulnerable,
brecha.
Less strong, and so on and so forth.
Mira el
So they
Carpathia.
needed to get priority when they would be saved. Ironically, this was,
Está diciendo que le están enviando
something
mensajes.
that didn't pan out.
Y el Titanic le dice que vayan a por ellos, que se están hundiendo. Que han,
Where it's like every single woman and child on board died.
que han colisionado con un iceberg.
I believe the Atlantic was pretty bad when it came to that, and there were a couple of others, I think. But the idea is that if you were, so it wasn't in like an absolute rule. It wasn't women and children only get into the lifeboats. It was women and children first. The ideal way you would put this in practice is if you have a group of people at a lifeboat, you have you have men, women, and children. You just say, okay, I'm going to load up the boat. Women and children get in the boat first, and then you put the men in. So maybe you have a family. Women and children from the family get in the boat, and then the father gets in. And there was different interpretations of how to actually do this role from different officers. Like on the port side lifeboats forward, Lightoller had a very strict no men
Gente
policy,
de verdad,
no men at all. Women and children, but no, the men had to stay
Por
out,
favor.
even if there were no other women or children
Os
present.
pido por favor el
But on the
mayor
starboard side,
respeto.
forward, Murdoch,
Estamos
he was
hablando
fine,
de una tragedia. Si no,
putting women
si no
and children
queréis,
first,
si
and
no
then he
tenéis
allowed men
respeto, iros de aquí, ¿vale?
in. And
Por favor.
yeah, there was just a wildly different interpretation.
Si vais a estar con tonterías, iros.
different outcomes depending on what boats you were getting
Hay que
in
tomarse
and
esto en serio. Si de verdad os
what
gusta,
officers
os
were
lo tenéis
going
que
in
tomar en
those
serio.
boats.
Si no, aquí no hacéis nada.
Yep. And one thing that David said earlier is, I think we all mentioned earlier a little bit, is the seriousness of the situation in the beginning makes it harder for the boats to be filled.
Vale, ya están bajando los botes.
So, on the starboard side,
Mira gente, por la
where
ventana
it's
de la
women and
izquierda del
children
bote
first,
se ve
and then
la
men
cubierta de
are put
paseo
in
privado.
versus the port side where it's women and children only, and then no men are put in. Then the boats are lowered. You have in the beginning of the tragedy as it's unfolding, the ship still looks pretty sound. Nothing is dramatically happening. The ship's just listing in a little bit. The trim's off slightly. It just seems like something might be off. Passengers think they're going to come back after they're being rowed out. They don't want to go in these boats, etc. It's cold. Later on during the nights, they want to get into these boats, and then that's when the chaos starts. So it's hard to get passengers to be convinced to get into these lifeboats too, let alone women at all. And then you get women who don't want to be separated from their husbands. So on one
Me
side
encanta
of the
porque han
ship,
puesto...
husbands are
Se
allowed
escucha de
in
fondo así el
with
ruidillo
their
de
wives.
la
So
multitud,
you
el
have more
ruidillo de
who
la gente.
might want to get into the boats, while on the port side, Light Teller was very hesitant to even allow young male passengers to get in the boats. 13-year-old boys, for instance. I think it was
Arthur Ryerson.
Yeah, Arthur Ryerson, he was 13 or 12.
I believe the line goes, he's only 13.
He's only 13. Of course he can go. And
Bajaban lento los
I
botes,
think after that, Light Teller said blasted no more boys.
se ve el agua ahí dentro.
Titanic movies.
Mirad los ojos de güey, se ve
So
agüita
he
por ahí.
has a completely different perspective on who was allowed in these lifeboats until all the women and children go first. And this is back when, the age of when a boy becomes a man is different. And if you read Titanic,
Hombre, este bote parece
passenger and
bastante
crew
completo,
logs,
¿no?
or manifests,
Al menos como lo pinta la
you'll see
simulación parece que sí.
a very different point of when somebody is considered an adult, which I find very interesting too.
Especially when you consider like Jack Thayer, who was 17 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But even that was considered too old.
Yep.
To enter the boats.
You consider basically you consider him an adult. If we always say that no second-class children perished on Titanic, but I believe there are passengers under the age of 18.
La música también de la huilla.
Did die.
Está como muy bien
I
hecho, tío.
I don't have those.
I want to believe I don't quote me on it, but I believe I noted that and thought that's not right then. But back then in 1912, once you hit like the age of 16, you're considered an adult. So you get your big boy trousers and you move on with your life, more or less. Watch Titanic 1953.
That was the story. I think Frank Goldsmith. He talked about someone they were traveling with who had just gotten his.
Oh, exactly. Yes.
And who stayed behind
With the men.
With the men.
Right. Now, as we watch lifeboats being lowered in our animation, I want to point out here another one of the little notes of the animation disclaimers, I want to say, before we get into the fine details. We note that the lifeboat lowerings, we say that it's around this time the lifeboats are lowered, because our animation can't exactly sync up perfectly when the generally accepted times for the lifeboats are lowered, for a couple of reasons. One, because we believe it's impossible to say that the lifeboats, regardless of how much research goes into it, that lifeboats were lowered at perfectly at like at 12 50x time, etc. And two, when Jack created
Mira
this
eso, gente.
animation, the main researchers who worked on it, and I was
Mira
part of
qué
that
vista.
trio, gave him a bunch of stuff all the time saying, Jack, do this, Jack, do this. And then right afterwards, there was new information that was given freely to
Ha pasado
everybody
una hora
by
desde que chocó
Samuel
con el
Alfred,
iceberg.
which would have helped him a great deal, but unfortunately
¿Hay
we
alguien
were a
que
week
haya
too
estado
soon.
desde el principio del
For the
directo,
next year's
gente?
anniversary, we hope to implement that. And then, so while editing this entire animation, we tried to move things around to sync it up. And you're going to see how we hid a couple of boats to try to sync with Sam's timeline, but it's kind of fuzzy. But
I think anything like that can be forgiven. Any kind of like slight differences in times, or I mean, as we said, the field of Titanic study is ever evolving.
No había luna
It's
ni
true,
estrellas
yes.
cuando el Titanic. No había
we
luna.
hope that, we
Estrellas,
hope that
claro
you
que
can
sí.
forgive us with a couple of things.
Estrellas, sí.
Especially when it comes to the boats, it's such a headache.
Además, en
and it's
mitad
very
del océano
difficult
se ven más.
to take research
Obviamente.
that's
No hay
especially
contaminación lumínica.
in text form and transform it into 3D, into something like this. It's hard enough to recreate a room in 3D, in a 3D space. I speak from experience doing that. I can't imagine doing it and creating an entire sinking ship. And now 2 people on the team have done it, and I have no idea how they've done it. So,
Mejor dicho, yo llevo aquí desde 2 horas antes del
Kyle,
directo. Madre
you
mía.
can try to explain that if you want to. I don't
Qué
even
bien,
know
hombre.
if you want to say the process, but yeah.
I
sí, sí.
don't even. You just do it, kind of.
So yes.
You kind of inherently understand it, like how to do certain movements and stuff.
Lo que echo de menos quizá en esta simulación es el agua del mar ahí está como muy plana, ¿no? No hay olas, no hay oleaje, no sé. Un poco extraño, ¿no os parece?
It could be incredible, but of course never perfect. Did we discuss the CQD? First CQD has been sent out for a while now.
It had
Did
it.
Did we discuss what that means? What's the CQD?
You guys go ahead and discuss it.
Capacidad 65 y está a la mitad.
Yeah.
CQ was
Madre mía.
CQD was a Marconi specific wireless.
Yeah, I've got a thing here. So
CQ I think was
it means
Está un poco inclinado el bote, ¿no?
Yeah, let's see.
Este también sale en la película.
Yeah, there's a common myth about CQ.
No sé si os acordáis.
Quickly distress, but that's not true. CQ was a standard wireless code to get the attention of all stations. CQ essentially means all stations.
El Olímpico cumplió un rol demasiado importante.
D means distress.
Sí, bueno, es que
CQD meant
realmente se les conoce por
distress.
la tragedia del
It was a very
Titanic.
simple way of just telling
Si
everyone
no se
who's
conociera el
listening
Titanic,
that
no conocen ni
you are
mucho
having a
menos a
problem.
los otros dos.
And it was, even though it
O
was
sea,
a
la fama que
Marconi
tienen se la deben al
code,
Titanic,
it
supongo.
was so well known throughout the wireless telegraph world that it didn't matter what company, if you were with Telefunken in Germany or if you were British Marconi, American Marconi. It was one of those things that everybody just recognized as this is the distress call. But as we see in this disaster, the SOS code had also been introduced by this point, but it hadn't been as widely adopted, I don't think, by at least maybe the Marconi operators.
There's another form of distress that is utilized soon, just to foreshadow something that's going to
Oye, ¿para cuándo
explode.
un vídeo del Olimpio del
Just let
Britannic?
everybody know. But that's all.
Por ahora no lo tengo muy pensado, la verdad.
And this is, we're seeing boat number 5. I
Oh, there it
believe, right
goes.
now.
Una bengala, gente. Ahí está.
Okay. in a, I guess, what could be considered a
Ahí está la
vain
bengala.
attempt to get the attention of that ship on the horizon.
Now, the reason the lifeboat,
¿Qué he visto?
you're already kind of past that, but earlier you saw the lifeboat kind of, one of the lifeboats doing this thing where it was leaning on one side.
Uy, la sala
It's
caldera.
because when they're lowering the lifeboats, they're essentially just letting out a bunch of rope, right? You've got guys on either davit, they're feeding rope through the davits, and through the series of pulleys and stuff, it translates into, the boat just lowering down slowly. And it's very easy, if you're not careful, to just kind of let one side or the other slip.
La cubierta
The
F.
guys aren't synced up in how fast they're doing it. So that's why you have like the officer up there going left and right together, left only, or this,
Las compuertas no llegaban más arriba.
And of course we have our classic interior.
Y entonces el agua se está derramando por
corridor.
otro compartimento.
Which that's right outside of where Margaret Brown.
Oh, you said it.
I know.
Yep.
Oh, you
Margaret.
said Molly. Oh, no, you're fired.
Oh no.
I
her-
apologize.
That's okay. Kidding.
Molly's story is interesting because, of course, when after the collision, she said that she saw people in the corridor outside her room putting these augers into the floor and talking about closing the watertight doors, and that's how I believe it was Daniel Clistener. He went through that testimony. He wrote an article about that's basically how we know now what cabin she was in, because she could only be in that area, in a cabin, in that one little branching corridor, to see that. Nowhere else. Because she also had a cabin on the side of the, with portholes. I mean, all those cabins did, including Bibby cabins, but hers would have been particularly.
Bibby cabins. That didn't work that well, according to a couple of people.
BB cabins, by the way, are these. So you had cabins stacked on the outside of the ship in a lot of areas, and you'd have one cabin that's right on the side of the ship, and one cabin that's in kind of an inside cabin, but there was a thin, narrow corridor section that extended out to the side of the hull to give that cabin one porthole for ventilation and light. That's what a bibby is.
That is a bibby, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you really definitely did for the light aspect, because I when I've cruised before, I've cruised in interior cabins because I'm cheap, and you appreciate sunlight more than anything else, I'll tell you that much. And Molly Brown had cabin E23, and we were right outside E23. And that starboard corridor flooded relatively, I don't want to say relatively early, but there was a couple of accounts. There was a steward who went down the grand staircase because, was he a Turkish bath steward? He had his quarters down on F deck by the grand staircase, didn't he? Was Ray?
Steward Wheat was one of them.
Wheat. It's, ironically, I have a book open and his name is literally right there. Yes, it was Wheat. He noticed that the water was flooding his area of the ship on F deck down by the grand staircase, not from F deck, as we read right there on the infographic, but from the deck above, from E deck. It was flowing down the grand staircase to F deck, which meant it was flooding over the watertight bulkhead and into his watertight compartment. So it was essentially doing what Thomas Andrews told the captain it was going to do. It's spilling over the top of the watertight bulkhead at E deck.
Now, has the water reached Scotland Road at this point?
I believe yes. I think all points to yes, to a degree, but not to the seriousness that it would start coming under the door and cause a serious issue. We just have the steam escape.
El vapor se deja de ventilar
the last time
porque ya no hace falta
through the funnels.
y Y hay gente que todavía no quiere
It's,
salir
it's
fuera porque
interesting that
no
the
creen que vaya a pasar
flooding
nada.
of E deck on the starboard side happened
No creen
first,
que
and then
vaya a
we would
pasar
have the
nada.
port list later once that long expanse of corridor known as Scotland Road happened later. That completely long, unblocked corridor flooded.
¿Dónde
And
está
that's what
ese
created
vídeo
that port
original?
list.
Todavía no lo han
Period.
subido.
Not an
Esta
open
es la
door.
primera vez
Which
que se ve.
in this new animation, everybody, watch out, everybody. This new animation, we've closed the door. We've had the door closed after it was opened because some of the lifeboats were lowered by officers, and those lifeboats lowered right by that door, and nobody saw the door opened. But I think that they would have noticed an open gangway door as their lifeboat was lowered next to it, since a lot of passengers, as their lifeboat was lowered by the side of Titanic, looked into portholes that were flooding and noted them later. I think Margaret Brown, who we were just talking about, noted that she saw an open porthole that was flooding. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And so did Emily Ryerson. She saw a window that was flooding as her boat was being lowered. So if one of these lifeboats, which were on the port side, had lowered next to that gangway door that was indeed ordered to be opened, and the door was
Los
still
tipos que hablan
open
en
at
inglés
that
son
time,
los
they
que
would
han
have
creado esta
indeed
animación y los
noticed
que han
it
creado
and
el
had
juego.
remarked about it, and they did not.
Básicamente, hacen directo
So
todos los
perhaps the
años.
door was opened at one point, or they were ordered to go open it. They
En
were
el
not successful.
aniversario.
Or maybe perhaps they unhinged part of it. The ship sank. The bow hit the bottom of the ocean floor, and that's a big impact, and it caused the door to then open afterwards, because it is open, or it was open at the bottom of the sea floor, along with the sliding gates inside.
Está diciendo que Ida y Isidor Strout, ¿os acordáis de los dos abuelillos que salen en la película y que se mueren juntos en la cama?
On April 15th,
Pues
1912.
se refiere a ellos. Lo que pasa es que al parecer los
Even
vieron,
though the steam has
en vez de
stopped escaping,
en su cabina,
it's still cold
los
out,
vieron cogiendo
and the
una
ship
silla de
still
la cubierta y
seems
quedándose
relatively
ahí
safe, does it
juntos.
not?
Entonces le acaban de ofrecer un bote a ella y ha dicho que no se va a separar de su marido. La famosa frase esa de hemos estado
in the water that
muchos años
they
juntos
get moving away from the ship that they could really start to see how
y no nos vamos a
far
separar
down
ahora,
the water she had
básicamente.
settled at the forward end.
Right.
Because if you're standing on the boat deck and you look down, you can't really see the side of the ship probably too well.
Yeah, it's all a matter of perspective.
¿Cuánto
I think it
falta para
was,
que se hunda? El sueño me está
Was
ganando.
it Ava Hart, who
Pues le queda un
I know she
ratito
was a young
todavía.
girl, but she still said later on in interviews that
1 hora y
she
25 minutos.
didn't realize it until she was in the lifeboat, like you said later on, that she noticed that the ship would sink away from the ship, because she could look back and see that it was already swept down. I mean, right here, if we're looking at it, we can see that D-deck first class, the cabins there, underneath boats 3 and
Acaban de
1,
lanzar otra bengala.
are being submerged.
But the folks all in the well deck aren't submerged yet.
No.
So as far as everybody can see, at least from a visual standpoint,
Mhm.
the ship seems all right.
Yes.
She might be settling, but they have no reason yet to think that she's going to founder.
Right. And again, I want to point out, as I mentioned a while ago now, that it's for the sake of being able to see what's happening during this event, we've upped the brightness a little bit. Again, it's something that has to occur for these, in our opinion, has to occur for these animations and these recreations so that the audience can see everything that's going on. Otherwise, if it was like it really was, and you were trying to use your unattuned night vision, quote unquote, it would be more
A lot darker.
saturated and dim. Yes, it would be a lot more dim. But we don't have any additional lights. We don't have, our funnels are not lit up or anything like that. If we have lights bouncing off the smokestacks, for instance, that's
Gente,
a
¿cómo
light
gusta
that's just
rolear,
coming
eh?
off of one of the natural sources of one of the sources from Titanic, such as the skylights from the grand staircase, or the aft grand staircase, or a casing, or something like that.
Or the or any like skylights.
Vale, aquí es cuando dice
Eventually,
Bright
we're going to
usa
try
el
to figure
SOS
out. And I know some of us
en
on the
vez del
team are doing
CQD.
so. Some of the researchers are. Which cabins and which rooms should be illuminated at this point?
Dice que puede ser la
during the
última vez
sinking, or
que lo manda
that's
y
always a
bromean
fun
entre ellos.
topic of discussion. Which cabins would be on? For example, right there, the cargo hatch.
Pues
Cargo
Jack
hatch number
Phillips
one,
no
the lights
sobrevivió.
are on.
Bright sí.
But I don't think they should be on. In reality,
Mira
probably,
cómo está ya.
especially for the sake of the men in the crow's nest, they probably aren't on. The ship,
Yeah.
the ship was probably really, really dark, and I know I told, which is the nice thing about this dollhouse model, as we named it. You can, and what Kyle said earlier, is you can
Gente,
turn off
mirad en el
rooms.
mástil arriba.
Can you turn off every room if you
La
need to,
luz.
Kyle, like individually?
Not in the current state of the model, no, but it would be possible technically if it's reshuffled a bit.
That's cool.
¿Qué hubiera
'Cause
pasado
I
si
know
el
I
titán se hubiera
told
unido
Jack,
en el
Jack,
día?
who is
Pues
the one who created this animation. Again, bravo to Jack for doing
es que
something
siempre,
incredible like that.
es que en
He,
realidad todas las
I
teorías
told
estas
him to
pueden
turn
cambiar,
off
depende de
the
qué
lounge
cosa.
lights at a certain
Puede
time,
ser que hubiera sido
whenever
más
the
fácil,
stewards
realmente,
kicked out everybody
porque
in the lounge
de noche no
and
parece que,
extinguished the lights. I said, Jack, turn off the lounge lights,
que
and
es
he did
como
so.
todo más
Thanks,
caótico, más,
Jack. Good job.
es todo mal, ¿no? De
and-
noche.
And that was
En
pretty
cambio
cool.
diría,
So yeah,
no sé,
there's-
como que se te aclaran las
there's
ideas
things like that that are neat, and you
y
can turn
es
on the
más
lights.
fácil todo, ¿no?
Like, for example, we could probably, in a future animation, have cabin lights turn on one by one after the ship hits the iceberg and the engines turn off. Right here, we had
Gente,
Lifeboat 8
25 personas de
lowered.
65.
In Sam's newest lifeboat launch schedule, I'll call it, it seems that lifeboat 6 is lowered before, is it 6? 6 is lowered before 8. So that's one of the newest things that Sam Halpern has released. And of course, we couldn't go back and change the
Mira
animation
cómo se ven
beforehand,
hasta
but
los
we
remaches.
definitely
en el
made sure
casco.
to note of that in the
Tiene como
video
mucho detalle,
that
¿no?
is being released later
Me
on
parece.
afterwards. That 6 was probably Six was probably launched before 8, and 8 was probably launched after Lifeboat 6. But we couldn't show that here because you're going to later see Lifeboat 6 being lowered, and the lifeboat falls for 8 are already down next to it, and it would have just not made any sense and looked wrong. So we kept it the way it was. The lounge was not open throughout the entire sinking. At one point during the night, the stewards came through and kicked out everybody who was in the first class lounge.
Mira eso.
I think was it Edith Russell who was in the lounge, and they were like, "Get out of here."
Off the top of my head, I'm not.
I always, if there's one passenger who I always associate with the lounge, it's for some
Queda
reason it's Edith Russell.
1 hora y 20
I
minutos,
don't know why.
gente.
I always just imagine. I always picture Edith Russell in the lounge playing cards. It's her. I feel like whenever I watch one of her
1 hora y 20 minutos.
interviews or read her stories, she's talking about how she was in the first class lounge.
Me imagino todo
Eve
oscuro con
Russell
los
was a
gritos.
first class
Pues en los
passenger.
momentos finales creo que ponen gritos y todo. Es
a
como súper
fashionista, if you will. Now, she was
traumático
a fashion
hasta
designer,
verlo en una
and
simulación. Veremos a ver.
I believe, more or less. And
Queda
I'm
una hora
probably
para ya el
ruining what she
pánico de
really was.
verdad.
She was had a cabin on A deck forward, and she had a lot of clothes with her in trunks. But one of the things that she was doing on the night of the disaster when the iceberg hit, oh gosh, what was she doing? She was in her cabin. I think her cabin was on A deck, starboard side, right by, adjacent to the side of the ship, and so she could have seen the iceberg but didn't. She missed it, and then she had to go and lock her cabin because she didn't trust the stewards. So she went back and locked her cabin before she went to go to the lifeboats. And she also had to make sure to go and get her lucky, this is a famous story, her lucky pig that she
Uy, gente
kept
más
with her.
interior.
The lucky pig, which when you
Esta
wound
es
it
la
up, it
zona de
played
los
a
baños
little
turcos
tune,
y la piscina.
which later
Ahí están los baños turcos.
children in the lifeboat with her entertained and occupied to not look at the sinking ship.
Inundándose poco a poco.
I don't remember if I read this or not, but I think in A Night to Remember, did they actually
Visión
use
subacuática, qué
the
cosa.
actual pig?
I know for a fact that the pig was on set. I'm pretty
Gente,
sure that
40
that was a
personas
weird
podía caber.
that was a weird phrase I just said. I've never said that before
Solo
in my
dos.
life. But I have the making of book, and I've now left my computer, everybody, to find this book, and I'm gonna figure this out. So this is important to me because I want to know now too.
I'm pretty sure it was, but don't quote me on that.
I know that Edith Russell, by that time, she had married and her name had changed, but she was on set, and I believe there's a photograph of her presenting, this is another weird statement,
1:04
presenting
de
the
la
pig
mañana.
to the actress who portrayed her in the motion picture. And
Tiempo
I
del
think she
Titanic,
used the
claro.
same pig.
Ah,
I remember when we
Aquí en España,
traveled to England, and
las
I
6 y
thought
2.
the pig was on display
Creo que,
at a
creo que la,
museum.
la
I
animación
searched
va 2
throughout the
minutos
entire
adelantada,
museum for
pero
that
bueno,
darn pig, and I couldn't find it. And then I
no pasa
found
nada.
out that the pig wasn't on display. I was very upset.
Just a little bit of a detour here.
Go ahead. We're tangenting.
I was actually away for a couple of
El
minutes.
pobre hombre
so
argentino,
did we
Ramón,
discuss
el
some of the
que escribió la
stories
carta que
from
hice el
the
vídeo
loading
hace
of the
poco.
lifeboats up to this point?
No, please do. The only one we discussed so far was Edith Russell, and she hasn't even left the ship.
No, we haven't even talked about Guggenheim.
Oh well, go. You can talk. Everyone can talk about Guggenheim.
Oh yeah. So yeah, obviously between about 12:30 to 1, people started just kind of, trickling into the boats, and you had people like Isidore and Ida Strauss, where they said, no, I will not be
Los
separated.
baños
from my
turcos estaban en el
husband,
Olimpia, el
as
Titanic no
we
contenía.
will
Sí, sí,
die
sí,
together, that
sí
kind
que
of
los
thing.
tenía. Claro que los
And,
tenía.
Isidore didn't want to get into the lifeboat, and because he would have felt bad about getting on board when others might not be granted that privilege. So they stayed on the ship. There's a little disagreement about where the Strausses went after they refused the lifeboat. I believe
¿Puede ser que la gente aquí no
one
tuviera
idea is
pánico
that they
o
just
creéis
took
que ya
chairs
sí?
on A deck and
Yo
just kind of
no
just
sé.
sat around on deck.
Vosotros, si no
playing
supierais
poker
qué
or
va a
something like
pasar,
that.
estáis en el barco
And,
más
yeah,
seguro del mundo,
So
¿tendríais miedo? Sin saber que se va a hundir.
yeah, but
Vosotros ponéis que no tenéis ni idea.
on the starboard side,
¿Tendríais
somewhere
miedo?
around 12:40, Murdoch was loading boat 7, and he had a hard time getting people into the boat. and then they didn't take the situation seriously, and everyone just kind of thought it was a joke. And Stuart Henry etches. This is the interesting one because, he was helping with Boat 7, and that's when he noticed Benjamin Guggenheim and his valet, Victor Giglio. And they were dressed in their evening wear, which is an odd thing. Your evening night clothes, you know that thing where it's like a tux, very fancy. And then that's when, Etches asked, what's this for? And Guggenheim said, we've dressed up in our best and are prepared to go down as gentlemen. And he then told
sí,
Etches
mucho más
that
perdiendo
if anything
de lo
should
que
happen
tenían,
to
sí.
me,
También es
tell
verdad,
my
las
wife in
pérdidas
New York that I've
materiales.
done my best in doing my duty.
Como aquella
And then he
mujer en la
left to,
película que dice,
help
no
the
baja en el bote, tengo que volver a mi
passengers.
cabina.
That's apparently kind of the story of the night.
Y le dice al
Apparently,
oficial,
Guggenheim did this
no,
multiple times, at
tú
least
te
twice
quedas
that we
aquí en el
know of,
bote.
where he stopped another steward and
Y mira, le
he
salvó la
said
vida
something
posiblemente.
similar.
O sea, está
The
bien.
steward apparently claimed that he said,
Pero que ya ves,
I
te llevas ahí
played
el
the game straight
equipaje y
to
de
the
todo y lo
end,
pierdes todo.
and that no
Lo
women
pierdes todo y además has
were
pagado.
left on board this ship because Ben Guggenheim was a coward.
El
Tell me
viaje
that my last thoughts will
es
be
que es
very
una
dark
situación horrible,
thoughts. And he supposedly lit a cigar and sauntered off to help with the boats. And that's just I think that's kind of one of my favorite stories from the sinking, because it's just so weird. This is joked about before, that the idea that Guggenheim was just walking from steward to steward giving his last will and testament, and I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know how much of this is true, and I doubt these are exact quotes, but it kind of seems like a thing he did. I don't know. But he's quite a character.
Otro bote a menos de la mitad.
I have a quick update on Edith Russell. Of course, back then, her last name was Edith Rosenbaum. I forgot about that. I knew that, but I forgot. Thank you, by the way. This comes from a friend. She changed her name later on in life. She wasn't married, but she had changed her name to Edith Russell.
Y ese es el bote que más
And
vacío va.
she was a journalist
Dicen.
and stylist, not a designer. And the pig in A Night to Remember was a replica, but she had the pig for a publicity photograph. And I did find the book, and the pig in the movie is different from the pig in the publicity photograph. So yeah,
¿Quiénes son los primeros en dar la noticia al mundo del Carpatia? El Carpatia, según vi,
Yes.
Legends that got passed.
no se le
Right, but this
permitía
is
hablar
definitely the
con
same
nadie
pig that she
hasta que
had
llegaran a
on
puerto.
Titanic.
De hecho, cuando
It's just
llegaron a
showing
puerto
the
parece
actress,
que
the pig.
retuvieron allí un poco
But
a
yeah,
los
again, thank you for the
supervivientes
update on
porque tenían que
the
dar
info
permiso
about
de no
Miss
sé qué y
Rosenbaum.
que no
So yeah,
podía hablar
everybody who
nadie con la
loves the
prensa
story
todavía.
of
Porque
Edith,
claro,
her
se los
name back in
comían porque
1912, she was Edith
porque
Rosenbaum,
claro,
and by a certain point, she
vienes de
changed
eso
her
y
name to
la
Edith
gente
Russell,
quería saber qué había
not
pasado.
through marriage.
Y me acuerdo, y de hecho los primeros periódicos que
Now,
hay
quick detour back to the boats is,
sale
it was at this
que
point
no,
also
que el
that,
Titanic ni siquiera
Ismay
se va a
appeared
hundir,
on
que
deck.
están todos a salvo y que está siendo
He was in his
remolcado para
pajama
Nueva York.
robe and slippers.
Bruce
That's
Ismay
it.
being the managing
Cacho
director
con
of
el
White
iceberg,
Star
pero
Line.
no le pasa nada.
Yes.
Luego otro que el Titanic
And
se hundió y que
Ismay was just up
se han
there on
salvado
deck. He
todos,
was kind of
o
kind of
que
annoying
hay una
third officer
cantidad
Pittman,
bastante pequeña
the women
de,
and children in the boats. There's no time to lose. And
de
Pittman
fallecidos.
dismissed him at first because he didn't realize it was Ismay, who was technically his employer.
If I could interject real quick, I believe that was actually Fifth Officer Lowe.
El bote más vacío fue el plegable que quedó con solo 10. Sí,
Yeah,
pero
I was going to ask you.
como
about
son
it.
40 personas, el otro
Yeah,
son
I know there were
65.
probably like multiple people that interacted with him, so it's
Por
hard to
eso.
say. But I know Ismay. It's kind of a classic. There's a lot of depictions of Ismay that are questionable, but I think the one
Ay,
that's
mira cómo
probably
baja.
accurate is that he was just kind
Eso
of
también se ve en la
annoying.
película,
He was
creo.
on deck and he was just.
¿Verdad?
Yeah, but you know, it's
Y
the
en un
thing where
juego,
it's like you can't
el
blame
juego
him. He's
este
the
de
owner of the
Titanic
ship.
VR.
And the thing is, people always talk about people would talk about Ismay like he's some kind of evil guy, but from all accounts, he was a really nice guy. He really cared about his ship and the people on it, and I think he was just in panic. Like he knew it was going to go down, and he didn't know what else to do. So he's just kind
He,
of.
he could very well have been one of the only people besides Captain Smith and Thomas Andrews to really understand how bad things were early on.
Right. He did. He was not, however, by many accounts, a
Me
mustache
dice que
twirling
entra mucha
villain,
agua
as often
en la sala de
depicted
calderas número 5 y de las
in,
tres
in
personas
Motion
que quedan
pictures,
allí
nor
trabajando
a
solo sale
cowardly victim or
el
cowardly
fogonero Barrett.
villain rather.
Los otros
That
dos se quedan allí
depiction
dentro
very much comes from
y no consiguen salir.
in a large part, I think, more the American press than the British press of the time, and
Recibieron muchas señales ya.
especially was
Errores humanos.
that image of Ismay as kind of the mustache twirling villain came from the
Muchos
newspapers
errores,
owned
es que
by William Randolph Hearst.
Realmente cualquier accidente
Kind of.
es un encadenamiento de errores.
Went out of their way to paint
Cubierta,
Ismay
eh.
in this
Madre mía.
villain-esque role by dubbing him J. Brute Ismay in their reporting. I forget how soon after the sinking. I know they were referring to him as J. Brute Ismay even before the Carpathia arrived in New York with the passengers.
Speaking of painting people in a bad light, perhaps
Mm-hmm.
¿Habéis visto gente que se han visto ahí
searching for a scapegoat?
a la derecha?
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
the
Los-
classic
los
thing in
cohetes.
Titanic, where you got to blame someone or something that continues even to the present day.
Not to go off on I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent about Californian, but it kind of I don't even know if you can directly say Lord alone was at fault. The
Ha empezado a
officers
tocar
on the
música
bridge who were
patriótica.
standing, it was kind of
La banda y
it
dice
was one
que
of
se
those
escucha
situations
a
where
través
afterwards they were kind of like
del agua, en plan,
Lord
los
said
botes
if it
lo
said
podían
something along the
escuchar.
lines, if it was so important,
Parece ser.
why didn't they come down to get me to come up on deck? And the officers on the bridge were more of the opinion that they told Lord, and Lord should have told them that it was a serious situation. It was something where there was a disconnect between Lord and his officers. And it's unfortunate that nobody took the initiative, it seemed,
Right. It's
to investigate. And it's interesting because Cape Race earlier in the evening, I forget what time. I have it. I know I have it here somewhere, but they actually heard Titanic signal Californian at one point during the sinking, and they never received a response, obviously, because the wireless operator was asleep. But they, I guess, because of the famous interaction at around 11 o'clock when Californian sort of barges in, I guess at some point Phillips must have thought, well, let me try Californian. They really loud in the headset, and the volume that they come in on the headset kind of indicates proximity. But unfortunately, that call to Californian went unheard.
And as they say, the rest is history, and now
This is-
and it's up to us to reflect on it, and unfortunately for them, we still give our opinions
yeah.
on their decisions. The song that was playing, by the way, everybody, I don't know if it's still playing. I don't have the sound on for the animation. Was for the Americans out there, because here in America it's much different than
Sí,
the
lo de
United
la
Kingdom. it is
Sabía lo de las bengalas blancas y las rojas, pero lo que me
Please look.
extraña es que hace
It's the land
relativamente
of
poco
hope and glory,
en un documental de James Cameron, no
is
sé si lo
not what it
habréis
is in the United
visto,
States,
sale
that
que
is,
en
here in the United States, it's
allá
pomp and
abajo se
circumstance,
encontraron
but in the UK,
bengalas
it's
de
the land of hope and
diferentes
glory.
colores.
Titanic's band, at one point in the night, turned to
Entonces, claro,
patriotic music.
a menos que
They
haya
switched
testimonios de
from
supervivientes que dijeran
early
que
on
solo
waltzes,
habían lanzado bengalas de color
comedy,
blanco,
pieces of music from comedy and ragtime,
no sé,
things that would keep the passengers entertained,
podían haber
calm,
sido,
just relax, things that they would play
podían
at
haber sido
dinner,
rojas
perhaps.
también,
They switched
aunque
to
no
these
parece.
songs to kind of get them not riled up, but to get
La
them
sala de Caldera
more
número 4
optimistic
se
to
está
the
inundando ya.
situation. So they played not just the theme of Great Britain, but the theme of the United States. They also played the Star Spangled Banner around this time too, perhaps. So the two anthems of the countries that they were going to, the United Kingdom, the United States, were played. They would switch between this, and soon they would have a more serious tone. As we don't have it, we didn't have this track ready yet, but Londonderry Air or Oh Danny Boy was heard as well. They would soon be switching to more serious songs, more somber songs, as the seriousness of the situation was starting to be seen by everybody on board. And the lifeboats were also being witnessed to be
Anda, mira,
getting
un
fewer
pasillo de
and
primera
fewer.
clase. Qué curioso.
We're a little bit behind in talking about maybe a few other things, such as the flooding around the ship.
Parece que el agua todavía
So
no
I
ha
just
llegado
want
a
to make a
primera.
quick note that about between 12:45 to 12:55, there were a few things
Me van a
happening
servir
around
los
the ship, like
binoculares
around
para esa
12:45,
noche.
there were
Sí, eso es
men
lo
who
que
had
parece,
boarded
porque a ver,
watertight doors open
vosotros
after
tened en
the
cuenta
engine room.
que los
There
prismáticos
was no
o
flooding there, and they
binoculares,
wanted
como
to
lo
run
digáis,
suction pipes through the doorways.
sirven para
And in
identificar,
boiler room 5,
como ves de más
they were
cerca
still
un
trying
objeto,
to
pero que ya has
fight the
identificado
flooding
lo que
and
es.
draw fires
No
in
es para
boiler
ver de más
rooms.
lejos, realmente.
The
Y
fires
si
are out pretty
contamos
much
que
by
los prismáticos de
12:55 a.m.,
1912
and
no
most of the
son
men left
comparables a
with
los que hay
soakholes.
ahora,
But leading
pues
fireman
ahí
Barrett
tienes la
stayed behind
respuesta.
to continue his work. And
Posiblemente no hubiera hecho mucho.
around that time, I
O sí,
believe it was when
la
Barrett
verdad es que
had
no lo
ordered a
sabemos.
manhole
También el
plate
tema
in the
de
stokehold floor
el
was
efecto
lifted
óptico
to
este
grant
del
access to some
horizonte
pump valves, 'cause
Oh,
the
yeah.
plates in the boiler rooms, the plates in the
y
boiler
el mar
rooms
en
had,
calma. Es que
you know,
son
some of
tantos
them were
factores los
portable,
que
and there
conlleva
was a
una
raised
tragedia.
floor, and there were valves and
Son
pipes that were
tantos.
there. And you know, the room was apparently a little bit hard to see in, and that's when junior assistant second engineer Shepard fell into the hole and broke his leg. Yeah, they lifted him out and he got carried to a nearby pump room. I'm not sure what happened to him after that. I've heard that they got him up to a higher deck, but of course he wouldn't have survived either way. And you know, water
It was
is
around like 10. I think it was around 10 minutes ago, approximately, when the water finally came rushing through boiler room 5 and sort of
Yes, it was.
forcing Barrett to
Yeah.
flee. And that was, I think, from what I recall in one of the previous live streams, that was caused by that bunker door giving way, or there was a theory that that was where the water came from.
And it was quite a bit ago that the first
Esta es la parte
SOS
del
went out,
hundimiento que
I
tarda más
believe.
realmente. Cuando el agua empieza a
Yeah,
pasar por la proa ya
And
acelera.
there's a kind of a funny moment behind that because
Ya
you know, when
acelera
they
y ya
did that,
se empieza a inundar mucho.
it was Harold Bride
Es muy
essentially
rápido.
jokingly suggesting that they should use SOS because it's
Venga,
the new
gente,
call and it
aguanta.
may be your last chance to use it.
Aguanta un
And,
poco más.
so
Hay que
they
conseguirlo.
started using it.
Por las 1500 personas que murieron, gente. Vamos a hacerlo por
But
allá.
never ceasing to use CQD as well.
Right.
And there was actually
160 personas
there's a story from
Han sido
the
evacuadas, buf.
station chief at
Y sobrevivieron
Cape Race,
700.
Walter Gray,
Es como muy poco, ¿no?
who knew Phillips from previous encounters. I think they were friends and went to school together, Marconi School. And he said that when he heard Phillips start to send SOS and CQD, he thought that was very, very wise on Phillips's part to send sort of the array of distress calls.
Interchanging them both together.
Yeah. He thought that was very smart of Phillips.
Have we talked about the quartermasters, particularly Roe?
Bro, no.
No.
Oh,
you mentioned
we
Bro.
love the quartermasters, don't we? So, after 1 a.m., somewhere around there, Quartermaster Bright was asleep in his quarters, and he got awakened by the news that the ship was going down. And it was at that point he realized, oh no, I'm late in relieving Quartermaster Rowe. So, he got up and went and did his thing.
Where's Quartermaster Rowe? Where's his station?
Quartermaster Rowe was stationed all the way aft on the poop deck, on the docking bridge above the poop deck. And it wasn't until Bright went to relieve Rowe, and they wonder what to do. Like basically, Rowe, after the first rocket launched, Rowe noticed a lifeboat in the water. He had no idea that any of this was happening.
And he even saw the
what was
iceberg.
going on?
That's the
Yeah,
irony of this entire situation. He assumed the iceberg was the sail of a schooner or a small sailing ship that they just passed by, and he basically thought, oh, that was close. Oh well.
Yeah. So this poor guy, he's quite possibly one of, if not
Mira,
the
suena
last
otro
dude
SOS.
on the ship
Well,
Who-
that's one way of putting it, but yeah.
who found out that what was happening, that there was even an emergency really going on, let alone that it was sinking. And so Rowe, when he
Claro,
kinda
también
got
hay que tener en
notified by
cuenta,
Bright of all
gente,
this, he called the bridge,
que la antigua
the
animación
telephone
tenía
that was on
todas
the
las
docking
ventanas y
bridge,
todos
and,
los,
Boxall answered, and
todos
Rowe
los
said he saw
ojos de buey
lifeboats,
encendidos.
which caught him by
Y no todo el
surprise.
barco iba a estar encendido.
And
Los
that's when
camarotes que
Boxall ordered
dejaron los
Rowe
pasajeros
and
no se
Bright
iban a
to
dejar la luz
take rocket
encendida.
detonators that were for some reason in the stern, and bring them
Entonces
to
este
the
es más
bridge.
realista también. Hay algunos ojos de buey que están apagados.
But
That's the story of Rowe.
But Rowe, he would eventually, I believe all the quartermasters survived the sinking of Titanic, so his story doesn't end in tragedy, like so
Yeah,
many others.
I think he ends up in charge of
Collapsible C? Yeah.
Yes.
Which would
Venga,
launch,
gente,
which would actually
menos de
launch
una
right
hora.
there from that position. That davit, that forward set of davits is cranked in is slowly getting collapsible C ready to be launched. So
There were also other little things, like at some
Queda
point,
menos de una hora,
Lawrence
gente.
Beasley was noticing the events
No
on
estoy hablando
film,
mucho porque es que estoy
the-
cansado.
the seriousness of the situation was dawning on him, and
Pero bueno,
at another point,
ver.
Jack Thayer, passed by Thomas Andrews, asked him what was happening, and he just said that the ship had not much over an hour to live.
un
And,
barco con
there were still men
10.000
in the
esclavos
smoking room,
descendió.
at least by 1
Sí, algo he
a.m.,
visto de ese.
and
Es que el
including,
Titanic tiene mucho,
Colonel Archibald Gracie. He went
hay
down to the
mucha
stateroom to
historia,
see that
mucho
to grab
sentimiento.
blankets,
No
and
digo
he
que en el
spotted
otro
a
barco
steward
no,
dragging
pero
barrels
era
of
como
bread
la
to
novedad, lo más
lifeboats.
grande del mundo, lo más
And,
seguro. Es como muchos factores
he
que hacen
tried to
que
get
sea
into his cabin,
famoso.
it was locked, and he asked the steward, who said it was due to
Tampoco
the fear
sé
of looting.
definir
So
perfectamente
by
por
that
qué,
time, there probably would have been quite a lot of
es tan
locked
famoso.
cabins, if not all of them.
Aparte de por la película, ¿no? La película ha hecho mucho. La del 97, pero...
stewards have the keys.
What time are we at now?
1:25 approximately.
Thank goodness for your watch.
Ni Dios podría hundir este barco. ¿Quién dijo eso? A ver, realmente eso tiene pinta de ser un mito urbano.
I want to quickly take a moment
Un
to
mito
shout out
que
to
ha ido de
126
generación en generación.
to shout out
Y
to
ahora dicen
our
que lo dijo
THGT
el
members
capitán, que
in our
si no sé qué, pero yo
chat,
creo que no. Lo que sí decía la White Star es que era prácticamente insumergible, pero nunca se le
I
dató
know
de
that- I know
insumergible
Zeno's there,
completamente.
Jack's there.
O al menos
Didn't
eso
catch
parece.
who else was in there keeping track. I know there's a bunch of researchers there who are also
Mira, otra cancioncita
keeping track and answering some
de la
questions.
banda.
There.
Robin's there. I think I saw Matt there as well. For some reason, we have a bunch of famous singers in the chat, which I don't understand why, but that's okay. And I don't know why there's someone saying I don't know what. There's a Lalafell there. Or no, Lalafells aren't potatoes. So someone who plays Final Fantasy, that one just caught me off guard. But anyway, yeah. Thanks to everybody. Oh, Derek, there you are. Hi. You were like the first person here too in the chat earlier. So sorry, but it's been a long time since I saw you. But yeah.
I'm here too.
Oh my gosh. Who was that? Who?
It's none other than James Panka, creative director of Titanic Downer and Glory
Hey.
and Project 401.
Hey everybody. I totally did not mean to infiltrate the stream. My Wi-Fi is pretty bad, so I'm sorry if you can't hear me too well.
That's fine.
I just wanted to pop in because I'm watching the stream, and this is the first time I'm seeing it, and I just am blown away by Jack's work.
Mira,
on
eso,
this.
gente, la escalinata y la
It's the first time
placa
I'm seeing the
Titanic.
text that I wrote on it. And Matt, I love all your additions that you have. Oh my god, like look at this shot. And I'm also like way behind, but the Titanic getting covered by water, Jesus.
Qué
like, this
imagen,
is
gente.
Beautiful,
Mira qué
beautiful
bonito.
work.
Yeah, wasn't that a nice one he did? Yeah.
I'm just so like blown away by it. I have a little like
Qué
That
trágico.
shot that you're gonna see real
Mira,
soon
este bote
is
ya,
looking
aquí ya estaban
down the
acelerando.
staircase well.
oh
Aquí
my
ya estaban
God.
metiendo más gente en los botes.
No, I'm like legitimately blown away by all this. I have a group of friends on my Instagram live watching this with me, and they're all just like in awe of this, and I am too, because like again, I haven't seen this. So just like big kudos to Jack for this. This is incredible. And then of course like Matt, Kyle, and everybody's work on this like over the years to like get to this point where
Mira, hablando de Violet
but
Jess,
Jack's work on this and Matt,
ahí está, ahí lo están
to
mencionando en
are really
los
helpful.
titulitos
Like I
en las
didn't
letritas.
get to see the animations for like
Estas
all
que
the
ponen informando de
and, like,
cosillas.
all the little things that you've added were really great. So anyway, I just wanted to pop in and say hello and say that I'm really proud to be working on stuff like this with you guys.
Yeah, your
El agua se ve
your
muy
text
realista.
is
Ve,
heading-
esta agua es un poco
is
extraña.
bringing
Yo
this
no
to a whole
sé.
level,
Me
and
gustaba más la
just-
anterior, la
I never
verdad.
got a chance to
No
say
sé.
that. I had to trim a little.
Es que es como muy
Yeah,
opaca,
I
¿no?
know,
No
and
sé.
it's fine.
Un poco
Like,
extraña.
all the edits are totally fine. Great. I should say,
Gente, 50
since I'm
minutos.
here, about the text that you guys are reading on this video. A lot of these text blurbs go back to the days of MySpace.
Oh my gosh.
I have been posting real-time updates going back to whenever MySpace was still around. So like at least when I was in high school, so pre-2009, probably like 2007 might have been the first year that I posted real-time updates.
I
The
think
first-
MySpace started in roughly 1974.
Exactly.
Mira, aquí discuten de,
But,
entre dos
so
oficiales
for
de quién se
years,
ocupa
I
del
just did
bote.
text-based
Y
updates.
claro, el que lo
Year by
ocupa
year,
sobrevive,
and they
el
got
que
more
no, cuando.
intricate as they went. A couple years ago, we started doing like a live thing.
Gente
But
como
I'm
que se
so
está escorando el
happy that
barco
they
un
have
poco, ¿no?
found a home in like an actual thing. So some of these literally go back over a decade, which is pretty cool, almost 20 years old. So they're of course they've been edited like crazy and updated like crazy. But,
No llenaron ni un solo bote.
but I'm so glad you guys are enjoying them because they've only ever been enjoyed by the 20 people who watch my live streams every year.
Yes, we definitely are.
So.
And before you leave, quick shout out and saying congratulations for your presentation down in Florida
Yes.
at the museum with RMST.
Yeah, if anybody's in Florida, if anybody is near Orlando, or next time you're in Orlando going to the Titanic Museum, the Titanic exhibit, I should say,
Uy, las colas.
we now have a really cool
Por eso
3D
se estará
projected
escorando,
video
¿verdad?
of VDR visuals, like basically the things you're watching right now. In fact, this exact shot I think is in the museum now. We
Está
have
mucho
a,
mejor
when you
conseguida
walk into the museum, you watch a
que en la
4-minute
anterior
clip.
animación, ¿eh?
In fact, I made sure that it was exactly 4 minutes and 14 seconds long because I'm a crazy person. But as a shout out to April 14th, but it's a 4-minute and 14-second long video that gives you an intro to the museum before you
Gente,
walk in.
fijaros allí al
But
fondo,
it's really cool.
en
And
la
we had a
popa,
really
que hay
great
un
event
bote que lo
yesterday
están
and
bajando.
the speech went really well, and everybody was so sweet. So definitely go to
Otro
the
bote
Orlando
sin
Museum,
llenar para
and I
variar.
hope, we hope, RMST hopes as well, that we get these visuals into more of their venues, like in Vegas and whatnot. So hopefully, THG Project 401 visuals will be coming to a museum near
48
you.
minutos, gente.
I've been waiting for you to say that for years.
All right, I'm going to enjoy the rest of this live stream. Sorry for interrupting. We everybody have a great evening, and
A punta de pistola tienen que ordenar.
tomorrow I'm going to post on all of our
Tienen que poner
socials,
orden.
or at least some of them, a little snippet of the video that is playing at the Orlando Museum.
Awesome.
So keep an eye out for that. All right, guys, have a good night.
Thanks, James. Take care.
Bye-bye.
And that was James Panka, our creative director of Titanic Honor and Glory, Project 401. It was nice to hear from him. Yeah, he had a busy couple of days down in Orlando, giving a presentation at Titanic, RMS Titanic, an event there, 2 days. So yeah, and he's in a hotel room somewhere in Florida. I'm not going to dox him, so his Wi-Fi was not possibly stable enough to join us tonight. But yeah, we missed a lot of stuff. Some of the craziest events of the night just happened at boat 14. So let's try to recap what just happened really quickly at boat 14.
Well,
if we can.
At boat 14, apparently a man tried to get in, and he was ordered out by an officer.
Otro bote
fired his
sin.
gun. Saying, "Stand back!" I say, "Stand back." And, the next man who puts his foot in this boat, I will shoot him down like a dog. And it's at this point in the sinking that things are starting to crack. They're starting to fall apart, as Cal said. Not too severely, but that calm is starting to get really, really uneasy. People are starting to realize that something might be happening.
I would say so.
Lo que están diciendo es que lo de los tiros en el bote 14 y que aquí ya la gente está empezando a darse cuenta de que algo va mal.
It's a significant piece of
Ahora.
Real estate.
Pero claro, es que nosotros no sabemos la historia.
And boat 14 has
Pero cuando no, hace cientos años tú estás ahí y no te la sabes.
Earlier even, the scene around the boat was getting really chaotic, and there were more men who tried to rush the boat.
Y dice,
Able-bodied seamen,
no sé, no sabes si se va a hundir, si no, además como la tripulación tardó tanto en decir que se iba a hundir para no causar pánico, pues entonces claro, ya no sabes qué pensar.
1:15 to 1:30, it was also stewardess Violet Jessup got into lifeboat 14, and we all know about Jessup, of course. Titanic, she survived Titanic. She was on Olympic when that collided with Hawk, and she would eventually be on Britannic. And not only would she be on Britannic and survive, she was, in a way, she was on a fourth boat that also sank. One of the lifeboats that got pulled into the propellers. She was the luckiest woman to ever live, quite possibly.
Well, maybe, yeah. Actually, I never considered it that she was on a fourth boat that sank, technically. But yeah, that's rough. So yeah. Now all these aft boats, they seem to be lowered pretty quickly in succession, right after each other. Within like the three aft on the port side and the three aft, almost the three aft on the starboard side, are lowered within like 15 minutes of each other, roughly. I'm not looking exactly on Sam's timeline, but I think they are. So things are getting.
They're pretty close.
They're pretty close. I think they are. I think.
1:36.
Yeah, it looks like it. Yeah, but this is like the. And right now these boats, 11, 13, and 15 are pretty much the most significantly filled boats. Is it 15 or 13 that's going to be filled to capacity or over capacity?
13, both of them may have been over capacity, but I know 13 was very, very full.
Wow.
Oh, it's 13 has 55.
Un café parecía
55
Yeah.
according to
apagado
Sam.
entero, ¿eh?
I think
Have we
Sin
have we
luz,
talked
oye,
more about
qué,
Edith
qué
Rosenbaum?
cosa.
Oh, we talked a lot about her already.
Mira el bote.
Well,
Oh, she's on 11.
Yeah, she was in the lounge for a while, of course, and once she was on the boat deck, that Ismay had spotted her, and you know, Ismay was a very excitable guy. I don't think I mentioned that, but that was one of his other personality traits. Is, you know, if he got into a panic or under stress or something, he'd get a bit excitable. You know, he specifically saw Edith, and he was like, "You, what the devil are you doing here?" I thought all the women had left the ship, which is a strange thing to say. But yeah, that's when Ismay grabbed her and guided her up to lifeboat 11. She was almost hauled into the boat by two men, but they put her down because she protested, and then she ran into Philip Bach, a passenger.
Oh yeah.
After he had put his sister
Otra
into
imagen,
boat 11, and Bach convinced her to get on the boat, and he helped
Mira
her
qué
over.
panorama.
And that's when a sailor grabbed the toy pig she was carrying and threw it into the boat. He apparently mistook it for a baby. So.
Yeah, it was dark on the deck.
And yeah, so as boat 11 was about to be lowered, that's when they asked if there was anyone else
1:38.
nearby who wanted to get on, and that's when Mock got on board and they lowered away.
That's boat 13 coming down now.
By
And that
the
has
Gente, mira el bote 15, lo llenan más de lo
Fred
que...
Barrett is in charge of that boat.
Now this
And
is
Lo llenan más de lo
things
que
are about
puede...
to kind of get crazy for these two boats.
De lo que puede
See
llevar,
that little
curioso.
thing of water coming
Así
out of the
tenían que
hull
haber
there?
hecho con todo.
That is, I believe, the condenser.
discharge.
Yeah, condenser discharge. So the ship had a system where it cycled water. So the water would be pumped into the boilers, and it would get heated, of course, by the fires of the coal. This turned into steam. The steam would get pumped aft through pipes into the reciprocating engines. The steam would go through different cylinders, getting less and less sort of compressed, lower pressure. It would go through bigger pipes. Then the steam, after it went through the reciprocating engines, it went to the turbines, and then it went into these condensers, or it could have bypassed the turbines and went straight to the condensers. And what the condensers did is, well, they condensed it. They turned the steam back in the water by, I guess, just running the steam through like these kind of a matrix of things that had cold seawater pumped through them in high volume. And then once the water
Se habrá notado si el
back to the
Titanic no
water,
arrastra consigo
it
algún
was
bote.
pumped.
A ver,
That water was then pumped through a series of filters
uno de los
and
botes
heaters, and then went back to the
plegable
boilers.
lo
So the condenser
intentaron
played a critical
arriar,
part in this.
que es en el que se monta Cal en la película con la niña
running
esa que
still
rescata, que está sola.
When this was happening,
Pues
when
ahí,
Lifeboat 13 was going down.
como atan los
And the
cabos
water came
a
down
la
through the
grúa,
condenser, and the
cuando el
condenser
Titanic,
pushed the boat
el Titanic empieza a hundirse muy rápido y el bote empieza a irse para abajo
until it caused 13 to drift
con el Titanic, pero al
underneath
final
Lifeboat
consiguen
14,
liberarlo y,
15. Wait, which 15? Yes, 15.
y al final
Lifeboat
flota,
15,
pero
as that was coming
medio
down.
inundado.
And this is
Y en ese
the
bote murió mucha
thing
gente de
where
hipotermia.
13 is almost crushed by 15.
Crushed under and sunk by 15 almost.
And if you think about how many people were in
These two
Lifeboat,
boats. I mean,
these
both
two boats,
both boats could have been sunk.
Se les cae encima el
that could
bote.
have dramatically changed the number of people saved.
Do we want to talk about why the lifeboats weren't filled to capacity? There was
Many reasons why, yeah.
there were a lot of reasons. I think there's a combination of uncertainty about whether or not the davits could hold them, because these were relatively new davit designs.
Pues de milagro no les cayó encima. Esto también sale reflejado en la película. Si es que la película es una obra de arte, te pone cada detalle.
Yeah, there was just uncertainty about whether or not the boats could hold that many people. There's also the idea that they could lower the boats partially full to the water, and then they could load them further by rowing the boats up to a shell door or something. But that, of course, never happened.
Yeah, we're gonna actually hear Captain Smith later
17 personas.
try to call the lifeboats, or some of the lifeboats, back to the ship to pick up passengers from the open gangway doors in an attempt to fill those lifeboats.
Mira, gente, el número 401 en la hélice.
I can't even imagine how chaotic.
Hay más
that
películas
was.
del Titanic, sí, hay unas cuantas.
Actually,
De
going
hecho, la
through with
primera
that,
película que
Wings
se
of
hizo,
Pride.
la hizo una superviviente un mes después del hundimiento.
'Cause then you would have
Lo que
people
pasa es que
going
luego esa
back
cinta se quemó en
down
un
into the
incendio
ship
y no se recuperó.
and
Y en la película esa, la superviviente llevó el
It's
mismo
one of those
vestido que
things you
llevaba
only
la noche
conjecture.
que se hundió el Titanic.
especially
Now it's
especially this late in the sinking.
yeah.
after 1:30, things were getting really bad. Of course, it's 1:42, 1:43, I believe now.
Yeah,
somewhere
we're gonna
around
see how bad it is right now.
La sala de recepción. Cómo suena, cómo cruje. Qué mal rollo. Tú imagínate estar ahí solo. Qué velocidad, ¿no? Mira, 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 mira. Va rapidísimo ahora. Madre mía. Hoy la última cena. Wow. Estoy flipando. Y os preguntaréis, que esto lo dije en un vídeo hace tiempo, ¿por qué hay platos y vasos si ya habían terminado de cenar? Pues porque estaban, cuando el Titanic chocó con el iceberg, estaban preparando la vajilla para el desayuno del día siguiente. Por eso hay platos y vasos. Gente, qué locura de interior, Uy, madre mía. ¿Cómo está esto?
I'm still just I'm still reacting to that sequence.
Yeah, it's
Madre mía, y yo, no está como
beautiful
muy...
in a very haunting way.
No, está,
if
no
you're
tiene como
wondering
muchas
why the
coras,
two
en plan, se va a dar la
sequences,
vuelta.
reception and dining room look different. We just couldn't use new water with the
Madre
reception
mía.
sequence because that was so old. It couldn't be redone. So there's a few little things like that, but it's fine. So
It's a nice
Yeah,
homage.
yeah, by this point, things were really getting bad for Titanic, obviously. The forecastle's
Vale, dice
well getting
que
underwater, and anybody in
la
the
señal
lifeboats
del
could
Titanic se
clearly see
reduce
what was happening.
y que ya no
And
puede contactar con tierra.
it would, fears were getting pretty big for those launching the boats. That there was this idea that they'd be sucked down if they didn't get far enough away from the ship. So there was this impetus for people in the boats to just row, get away.
Madre mía, qué locura.
And there's
And-
more and more
De animaciones,
access
¿no?
points for the water. As
Yeah.
folks all in the well deck are going
Whoa.
under because you have these cargo hatches.
And on top of that, you also just have portholes in
Yeah.
various places. Some of them were opened by passengers. Some of them were broken. I think a couple at least were broken. And it's been said that the total area opened by the iceberg was about 12 square feet. That's about the size of a regular doorway. And with every new open window, porthole, or door going
Y
underwater,
pensás que
or
todo eso
hatch,
está ahí
you're
abajo,
just greatly
gente.
increasing the areas where water is getting into the ship. And so also sometime by this point there was a steward named John Stewart the steward, who he was going through the first class smoking room to check for passengers, and he found Thomas Andrews there. That's where he was standing at the fireplace, looking at the Plymouth Harbor painting by Norman Wilkinson, and his lifeboat was nearby. And Stewart said, "Aren't you going to try for it, Mr. Andrews?" And he just didn't answer. So Stewart continued on. Although, obviously, Andrews was later seen on deck, so it's he.
Está hablando de
almost
que
certainly
4
didn't stay in the
pasajeros de
smoke room and
primera
die there.
van, se echan unas cartas y luego se
a
dan la
quick
mano y ya
sidebar is
ninguno se
that-
les ve de nuevo.
Painting Plymouth Harbor by Norman Wilkinson. Wilkinson
Una
would
partida de
eventually
cartas
go on to paint.
a esta altura, ¿eh?
So he painted the smoke room paintings on Olympic and Titanic, but he eventually went on in World War I to create and design the dazzle paint schemes that were used on warships at that time, including Olympic. And so back to Titanic, things are just getting very uneasy for people. For example, at one point, third-class passengers Eugene Daly, Maggie Daly, and Bertha Mulvihill were making their way to the boat deck, and on their way up, Eugene had nearly fought with a man who, when he asked if they could have a life belt, because the man thought Eugene was taking it for himself, but he realized he was asking have the life jacket for Maggie. And later on, they went up to the aft well deck, and there were a bunch of third-class passengers who had been
Gente, al
who were
Titanic
gathered
le
there, and
quedan
they were
30
prevented from
minutos,
going up to the upper decks
nada más.
because they had these gates. They weren't gates like in the movies or the Bostwick gates or anything like that, the collapsibles, but they were these low
Últimos
waist-high
30
gates
minutos.
on, at the tops of stairs on the exterior decks, and there were apparently crewmen there trying to keep them kind of aft. Hey, it's not your guys' turn yet, and so on and so forth. So a lot of people were forced to wait
Os
on the
recuerdo de
aft
nuevo
well deck.
que esto estaba pasando
and-
hace 111 años.
Yeah, little Hitler syndrome. Eventually, the crewmen guarding the stairs relented, and they opened the gates and started letting them through. But for a while there, they were trying
Que
to
creo
keep
que
them
no
out.
tenemos muy en
That's
cuenta, que
probably
lo
the
vemos
one
aquí y se
kernel
nos
of
olvida
truth
que esto
to the
estaba
idea
pasando justo
idea
ahora,
that the third-class passengers
hace
were kept down
111
by-
años.
and by gates. for
Es
that matter.
importante saberlo.
And
And
that's-
there were some stewards that did go and organize groups of steerage passengers.
Yeah, like
and
Stuart
brought
Hart,
them up.
I believe, right?
Yep, Stuart Hart. He organized a few different groups before he was assigned to a lifeboat. I don't know how many trips he made taking them through the ship because they had to go through a series of corridors. And
Yeah,
things.
a convoluted pathway, right?
Yeah, it was not easy.
No, but he made the journey down and back up again a few times.
Yep.
And otherwise, organizing that many passengers
Se cayó la copa que estaba en la mesa.
in this ship, they did not have lifeboats in the third class decks, and I believe I've heard from one historian or one researcher say that third class passengers were somewhat just ignored to death, and there is a somewhat kernel of truth there, as Kyle said earlier. That at the end of the day, the first class has a section of deck that has lifeboats for them. Second class does too. Even the crew does. But third class, they're left to their own devices at that point.
I think it might have been, or one person who might have said that was might have been Don Lynch in the '94 A&E documentary, "The Neglected to Death."
I think you're right. Yeah, I remember that. I remember him saying that line too.
Quick note here. We're between 1:50 and 2 a.m. At this point, time is already quickly running out for Titanic. The well deck is already under. Forecastle's under. When was the last distress rocket
It
fired?
just fired.
Okay, so that one you just saw was the last one.
The last
fired
one.
That was
Fired by
by
our good friend Ro, who's just going to get into collapsible sea as it gets launched.
And it's kind of weird. He was the last guy to know the ship was sinking, and he was the last guy to try to let others know that the ship was sinking, in a way.
It's like poetry. It rhymes.
And when Lifeboat 4 got to the water, passenger Emily Ryerson looked into windows on A deck. She figured A deck was about 20 feet above the water, although at this point it's way closer in the animation. And
Her boat's already left. But yeah.
David, ni te duermas,
yeah,
un
it's already left the
sacrificio
land
que
zone.
haces.
She had looked into windows and saw in
Bueno.
portholes and saw water flooding into rooms with their lights
Es
on.
lo que se
If
merecen
you remember
ellos,
those
¿no?
ropes are dangling, those portholes that are probably right where the letters are for A and M is where her boat was launched about.
Esto es algo que no se
maybe
puede
that-
dejar
maybe that's-
pasar, sobre
but
todo
yeah,
para
that's
mí.
where boat 4 went down.
Me
She was
importa
in
tanto
4.
esta historia.
The boat with all the
Now-
millionaires' wives.
It was around this point
Vamos,
also
dormirme
that
sería un
our-
insulto.
we have many good friends on Titanic. And another one is
What was that?
Chief Baker Charles Jockin. He was down in his cabin sometime after 1:50.
¿Qué hora es donde te
having a
encuentras,
drop
Solda?
of liquor. The guy loved his liquor. What can you say?
Who doesn't?
Las 7
He
menos 7 de la mañana.
Jockin briefly met and spoke with the ship's surgeon, Dr. O'Loughlin, and it was around that time he noticed water starting to flood into his cabin, possibly through an open watertight door nearby, because the cabin he was in was on the port side of E deck aft, near the reciprocating engine room on the forward side. Which is interesting because this means that by this point in the sinking, water is so far inside the ship, so far aft on E deck, that it's practically flooding, if not right now, flooding into the engine room. And it's this is probably one of the ways in which it kind of goes over the bulkheads, because E deck was a big weak point there, because a lot of bulkheads didn't go that high. But even where Jockin's cabin was, the bulkhead, the watertight door was open. And so after that, Jockin left his cabin, went to A deck to throw about 50 deck chairs overboard, and then he went down to the A deck pantry to get some water, because you can't just drink alcohol the entire time.
Speaking of the engine room being filled up by water, this is like the last last message that was clear and concise from Titanic that was heard by other stations, other
El
ships.
último mensaje
I should say,
legible del
and
Titanic.
pull up to the boilers.
El último mensaje de
Captain Smith
socorro que puede...
released the wireless operators roughly around this time as well, but
Que
they
puede
did
leerse
not immediately
y entenderse bien.
their post, because I believe it was after that that Phillips had his last interaction with the Frankfurt, where he kind of,
Aquí es cuando
after
Bruce
having
Ismail
difficulties
se mete en el bote.
maintaining contact with Frankfurt all evening and conveying the seriousness of the situation, they said something, whatever their signal was, it was of such a casual nature that it caused Phillips to
Voy a llegar hasta el final de este vivo en honor
earphones off
a
and
las personas. Así me gusta,
exclaimed,
gente. Gracias.
"The fools."
Os doy las gracias.
That's when he tapped out, stand by, keep out. Which I think was overheard by Virginian. Might have been overheard by. No, I have it in my notes somewhere.
Got collapsible sea lowering away. With Bruce Ismay on board and Officer Rowe, excuse me.
Por la escora del barco, el bote roza con el casco del barco y la gente tiene que poner las manos para facilitar que bajarlo al bote. David, no te duermas, por favor. No me duermo, tranquilo. No me pienso dormir. Tengo un año para dormir. Hasta el siguiente aniversario. O sea que hay que aguantar.
Iparanga? Okay. I appreciate the quick looking and the note. There's one lifeboat left that will be lowered from Titanic.
Mira, una despedida de un pasajero de tercera. Adiós, amigos, soy muy viejo para luchar contra el Atlántico. O para luchar al Atlántico. Curiosa despedida.
As it's about to approach 2 a.m.
Venga, gente, 21 minutos. Uy, cómo suena, cómo cruje. Uy, uy.
Now, there have been several occurrences of gunshots at lifeboats. I believe we've had 3 now. We've had gunshots at lifeboat 14 and both collapsibles. And there will be one other occurrence where there's a rather controversial subject of the possible actual shooting of passengers, crew, and suicide, and that's still, indeed, as I said, a controversial subject that's, of course, probably never going to be fully solved.
No, I don't think
there's any way to solve that.
To figure that out.
There's many mysteries surrounding Titanic that, regardless of if you dive to Titanic or unless you unearth a photograph of the sinking or a long lost setting a recording of the actual events, somehow you're going to that certain things are just going to be forever unknown.
I don't believe any of the bodies that were recovered in the aftermath were found to have been.
19 minutos, gente.
Right. I don't think so. I remember that one of the possibilities for a suicide was McElroy, but his body was also recovered, and there's no mention.
Solo han evacuado a 670 personas y quedan solo 2 botes para las 1500 personas
For
restantes
instance.
en el Titanic.
And I think it was pointed out in that A&E documentary that because of the bodies of so many of the famous people, the officers weren't recovered, that it helped fuel some of
The speculation.
the speculations.
Ya no hay proa, gente.
It's 1 a.m. local time where I am, but it's 2:02 Titanic time, parent time ship. And roughly around this time,
Lo de los músicos no tiene
couple of
nombre,
minutes, the last lifeboat has been launched, or will be launched, collapsible TV. If you could call that a launch, it doesn't have to go very far to get to the water below. And then you can see the 2 men who are going to jump into her bow from A deck, Stephenson and who was the other one? Woolner and Stephenson jump in just as A deck goes underwater, or just as the water breaches the bulwark of the A deck promenade. And these people, this is the last joke I'm going to make, these people are frozen in terror. Because, yeah, that's the limitation of our animation, everybody. I've seen this joke several times in the chat, that our figurines are rather stiff and lifeless, but indeed, yes, they're just static figures that we place around the ship. Or Jack, not me, I don't place them around the ship, but Jack has placed around the ship. I believe I'm taking credit for modeling them at one point, because I think they're modeled after the mystery shadow man that was seen in one of the demos that I had made. And I think Kyle had you're not canceling me, Dan. And I think that Kyle had modified them. I even feel like I made that life jacket that's not even complete on them. And somehow they've been turned into this these passengers and crew around Titanic. Yeah, at least they're not the T-posing guy on the bow of Titanic.
Very much reminds me of the shots in that '94 documentary, the filming of that model, because that all was like
Gente, le queda nada ya, eh.
They were, yeah.
figures on there, so
Le queda nada.
that's what I'm being reminded of at this moment.
I just saw briefly, now I can't see who just said it, but someone said foosball people, and yeah, they look like foosball table people. That's more clever than anything else. That's what they look like. They just need to be painted 2 different colors. But
Gracias
indeed,
por la donación, Luz
they're,
Dani
you know, they're
Correa.
there to represent
Por ahí en TikTok. Muchas gracias.
certain groups of passengers and crew. It takes a lot of effort to animate people, of course, and that's something that we've never wanted to get our
Madre
hands
mía.
dirty with. And then it opens a whole new can of worms of if you
Tiene
animate
una escena
certain
este
passenger or
hundimiento,
certain
mira
crew
eso,
member,
tío.
you're adding
Uf,
life personification
se
to
te
this
ponen los pelos de
figure.
punta, eh.
Is it going to represent this person? Is it going to represent this passenger? You know, you have to add direction to it. You have to add direction to the rigging. You have to. It's a whole new thing. It's a whole new ball game. It's a whole new piece of work, really. In that we're not ready to go down. So, right now, just having them skate around the ship every once in a while, or be positioned in areas where we know passengers would be would congregate is what Jack has done.
So it's about 2:05 to 2:06 a.m. Titanic has roughly 15 minutes to live. People at this point are really realizing that the ship is going down. I mean, I'm sure most of them realized that a while back, but you know, if you didn't think it before, you were probably pretty sure now. And you know, this is of course in the Marconi suite. Phillips was still making his final attempts to send out messages. Bride had put his put on his life belt, and he strapped a belt on the Phillips. And this is kind of
Gracias por las
one of the
donaciones,
crazier
gente.
stories from the sinking, where apparently Phillips
Momentos
asked
finales.
Bride to grab a coat and spare money from their cabin, which was right next to the Marconi office. The next
Mira qué
room over.
efecto le han puesto.
And when Bride
Mira
walked
eso.
back in, he saw a stoker
Efecto de
in the
burbujas.
office, Marconi office, trying to literally take the life jacket off of Phillips' back. And
Who was
he-
still transmitting and apparently oblivious to this.
Yeah, he was just so focused on his work. He would have, of course, had headphones on. And Bride was a smaller man, but he ran right at the stoker. He might have knocked him out with an object, but in any case, the stoker got knocked out cold. And at this point, it was pretty much that Phillips and Bride just abandoned their efforts and left a Marconi suite for the last time.
Se están preparando en el Carpatio para rescatar a todo el que pueda. Están yendo a toda máquina hacia
The
allá.
band was still there playing music.
I believe
And
Bride went on to the roof of the officers' quarters to help.
Gente,
with
se me
the-
ocurre una cosa. Si
with
queréis,
Will be, I believe.
me descargo el vídeo
Yeah,
cuando esté
Phillips
disponible.
ran aft.
yeah, and once Phillips ran aft, it was the
Y,
last time
y lo
Bride saw
traduzco al
Bride.
español todo esto. Y lo ponemos algún
And
día.
of course, we have at this point Carpathia just steaming ahead, trying to get the Titanic as fast as she can. And you know, the good credit to Carpathia's crew. They did everything they could to, like, even before they got to Titanic, they did everything they could to prepare for the passengers. Really good job on Carpathia's crew.
Arthur Rostrom was very, very thorough in his orders.
So, the Titanic's boat deck is about to go under fast, and there's going to be a lot of stuff going on. We're not going to go over all of it because it's so dense.
It's hard enough to cover all of the events of the 2 hours and 40 minutes as it is.
Oh yeah, we've missed so much, and there are probably some threads we've dropped. It's very difficult to cover all of this in time.
I think if we tried to cover it all, we'd be here for 24 hours.
Oh yeah.
at
But the
least.
short version is that when the lifeboat when the boat deck starts going under. A
Pobre
lot of
gente,
stuff
qué
happens.
sufrimiento hace 111 años,
The
justo
main
ahora, tío.
theme is people getting washed overboard and people getting separated. You know, water was rushing over the deck.
La gente,
People there was a wave of water that went
la
over the
última
deck and just
canción.
washed
Y
a
esta
bunch
es
of
la,
people, all over the place.
And that's
And,
esta es la
Start right
canción,
about now.
así.
and it
como
was
otra
at this
versión.
point, a lot of people finally got lost.
¿Lo
got
escucháis
knocked
bien?
overboard,
¿O le subo?
or they got separated, and you know, some people didn't see their loved ones ever again. And or their
Decidme si lo
friends.
escucháis bien, gente.
And it's just a whole everything just kind of in a very for almost 2.5 hours things have been playing out slowly, this slow build up, but in the last 5 to 10 minutes things just go completely chaotic and so many lives get snuffed out or separated in this time. It's kind of insane just how fast it goes.
Let's watch the last minutes of Titanic now, I guess.
Alright, we're gonna be quiet.
pelos de punta, gente. Dios mío. Dios mío. Uf. Indescriptible. No sé. Te deja mal cuerpo. La mayoría no duraron ni 10 minutos en el agua. O sea que de aquí a 10 minutos ya os podéis imaginar.
Okay, everybody, and we are coming back after we have watched the sinking of Titanic, the new animation, in memory of all those aboard Titanic on her fateful maiden voyage. And yes, it's difficult to say things after we watched that. The three of us were talking privately during that, and maybe we're going to share our thoughts on that, because I think it was... Did you say it was your first time watching it, David?
Yes, that was the
Sorry.
first time I had seen
Yeah.
the animation.
And we were just comparing it to... He was bringing up survivor accounts of what they described the ship and what it looked like in 1912. And so, again, just quickly, kudos mainly to our wonderful media manager, Jack, for creating this super impressive animation that he did for us and for all of you out there. So, hats off to him for today.
I tip my hat to, if I was wearing a hat, I tip
Right.
my hat
Yes.
to Jack.
It's definitely a step up from our previous animations in the past, but one of the main reason why we do this is to remember and commemorate the lives lost and the lives that were aboard and had to endure the sinking of Titanic 111 years ago. Roughly exactly 111 years ago, there'd be still people struggling in the water. There's still people in lifeboats waiting, hopefully, for rescue at this time. And to summarize, it would take us forever to summarize what actually happened during the end of Titanic, but I think it would be best, perhaps, to talk about what happens afterwards. Before Carpathia arrives, what happens for the people in the lifeboats until until Carpathia comes to rescue them. Let's talk a little bit about that before we
Gente.
perhaps head out for the evening. So we have 20 lifeboats in the water with 700 passengers in those lifeboats.
Vamos a poner esto un poco más flojo.
There's only a handful of those passengers and crew in the lifeboats who know help's coming. They just watched the biggest
Bueno,
ship in the world
gente.
sink, which was unimaginable to them, and now they have no idea what's going to happen next, really.
¿Qué os ha parecido? Yo es que con estas cosas me deja... Me deja... no sé. No sé qué decir.
Quite an ordeal.
Who's barely alive
No sé.
on the top side, on the bottom side.
No sé, gente, no sé.
Just a few moments ago, you saw dangerously close to the stern of Titanic as it was going down.
Bueno, gente,
Most that crew
eh,
was about an hour
nada más que decir.
so
Muchas gracias por haber estado aquí,
to the port.
acompañándome en este
So
primer aniversario que hago con vosotros.
so they have to survive and hold out for another
Espero que os haya
until they can find another one of those
gustado,
supplies.
espero que os haya parecido más o menos entretenido, que tampoco he hablado mucho, pero bueno,
Fix them up.
y nada, gracias por apoyarme día a día, gracias por aprender de lo que intento enseñar, gracias por todo, gente. No os puedo decir nada más.
Gracie.
Hoy supongo que publicaré un vídeo de un poco de un resumen y ya veremos los próximos días algunas noticias,
He did make it to
algunos periódicos
B, didn't he? Yes. Um,
y ya
there
está.
is a possible assumption that Phillips might have made it there.
There was some
Is
stories
some
that he
speculation,
may have made it to
or is that
B, but
or is that akin also that Smith could have
Así
captained
que nada, gente.
yeah, there's a few different accounts of Smith.
Gracias otra vez y ya soy libre. Ya hemos cumplido, gente.
of course, but there's always the stories like that
Ah,
of
es que nada más pensar que ahora mismo estaría muriendo todo el mundo.
members and passengers.
Que han pasado 7 minutos y dice que en 10. Bueno, es que me pongo a pensar esas cosas y no puedo. Si es que no puedo.
Holding a baby,
No puedo.
holding a baby like the Beatles
Así que nada, gente.
give it to
Gracias y nos vemos
in the boat.
en Instagram.
That was
Porque TikTok como que no puedo publicar muchas historias. No está... Pero bueno. Así que los que queráis saber de mí, gente, de TikTok o YouTube, seguidme en Instagram, me llamo igual. Y así me veis y todas las cosillas.
word that was pushed where we cut off Kyle, so
Así que nada, gente. Gracias y un saludo.
near my God to thee.
Larga vida al Titanic.
Was not the overturned lifeboat, but the one on the starboard side that was washed away. It was swamped, hit by the waves.
The sides were damaged.
Mhm.
The canvas sides had been damaged. I don't know if that was during its when they were getting it down from the officer's deck house, or if that happened during that when the waves came over the boat deck. I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Right, but it's filled quite a bit with water, to my understanding at that point, and the survivors inside the boat have to. I don't think the water's waist